Welcome to Beyond Fantasyland, conversations on sex, politics, and religion with your host, Kent Craybill.
You connect with the story of somebody who's experienced something and who really needs you to ask them to tell their story because they need to be healed by telling their story. I mean, there's something so profoundly healing about telling your story, especially stories of trauma, to someone who can receive it and receive it with love and not judgment.
Welcome to Beyond Fantasyland, conversations on sex, politics, and religion. Today, I am speaking with Corbin Addison. Corbin lives with his wife and two kids in Virginia, and he is the international best-selling author of 4 novels, Walk Across the Sun, The Garden of Burning Sand, The Tears of Dark Water, and A Harvest of Thorns. Recently, Corbin took a stab at nonfiction and has created yet another page-turner, Wastelands. And I'm telling you, I finished it recently. It's an incredibly riveting read, Corbin. But as with each of your works, there's a much deeper level being explored. This isn't bubblegum pop writing. Rather, Corbin is an activist who has a keen eye for uncovering worlds that are often too easy for us to ignore in our modern world. Along with writing international bestsellers, Corbin's also an attorney, a world traveler, and a supporter of numerous humanitarian causes. Corbin, I'm excited to have you here today. Welcome to Beyond Fantasyland.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
Corbin, today I really want to learn about you. I've spent a little time reading your books, listening to podcasts, which are interesting, and quite a few of them about your recent bestseller, Wastelands, and we're certainly going to get into that today as well. But what I'd really like to do is step back and learn about Corbin Addison, the person. I want to find out what makes you tick. So we're going to dive into to your upbringing a little bit, maybe your faith background, your education, go Mustangs, your time as a lawyer, your writing career thus far, and then hopefully we can talk about what's next. You up for it?
That's great.
Well, let's get started. So let's talk a little bit about background. Where'd you grow up? Tell me a little bit about your family life, your parents, and what was Corbin Addison's youth like?
Yeah, it's interesting because while I've only ever lived in the United States, I've lived all over the place and born in the Midwest in Indianapolis, which is where my mom hails from. My dad is from, he passed away a few years ago. He came from Cleveland. So both Midwesterners, though both of them had college experiences in Los Angeles. My mom went to UCLA and got a music degree. My dad did some graduate studies at USC. And this is both in the 60s. And so, they experienced California before the mega population boom. And so really, California was always in their hearts. So when I was 8 years old, they decided to pick up their sticks and drive west. And, we hopped in the car. My grandparents had just bought us a new car, which was one of those minivans that it wasn't really a minivan. It was like a pre-minivan. It was a funny little car, 1987. And we drove west, and I just remember, experiencing the United States for the first time from the road, which is a really beautiful experience. And it imprinted itself on me. I mean, I've since become an inveterate traveler. I mean, I can't get enough of the world. I would go anywhere, hop on any plane. Now, I didn't know that I would be that way at the age of 8, but it definitely, that Western journey was special. And then we landed in Southern California, where my parents had some friends, and lived with them for a little while till we could find a place to actually, a roof to call our own. Planted in Carlsbad, which I didn't know at the time, but is, I've been privileged to live in some of the nicest little towns in America, and Carlsbad is one of them. It's North County, San Diego. It's a beach town. Everybody's a surfer or knows one, and the ocean's never far away. We always rented because my parents could never afford to buy a house, even in the 1980s in California. At least a house that my mom would live in. So we lived a couple miles from the beach with a little tiny ocean view that my mom always pointed out on the back deck to whoever came over and and visited. And it was, it was a sweet life. I mean, I lived right down the road from all the schools that I went to. I did during middle school, which I'm now as a parent of a teenager in middle school, I'm realizing yet again what a general waste of time those years are in the educational experience. No offense to middle school teachers, you're heroes in my book, but it's less you and more the kids, who are molting and going through some really challenging times. And it's hard to have a bunch of them around one another all the time. So I was homeschooled those years and then went back to high school in the public schools. And in public schools all the way, it was kind of wild. I mean, I look back in California, I mean, everyone went to the public schools. In fact, everyone that I knew went to their neighborhood public school. There was no private school anywhere, in sight, even though it was a really nice kind of affluent area. It was very much a community, where everyone went to the same schools and knew everybody. And so small town within the megapolis that is San Diego, Los Angeles. I mean, basically that whole area is one giant city, and it was growing, at that time in the late 80s and 90s, at an incredibly fast rate. But I was fortunate to live in Old Carlsbad, and it was just a beautiful way of growing up. I didn't realize you're a kid, right? I mean, kids don't appreciate the things they're given that are really special until much later. I mean, I was blessed to be able to grow up in that environment. It was beautiful. The weather was amazing. Had a lot of friends. Got involved in a youth group in high school, which was fundamental for my personal development. My youth pastor, John Sparks, became kind of a father figure to me. And, those years, all my best friends were either through the school and the volleyball team. I played a lot of volleyball in Carlsbad, or through the church. And so it was just the idyllic kind of way, all the way through graduation. You mentioned Poly. I mean, I guess it was then the lead up, but I went to college at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, about 5 hours north of where I lived, 5 hours north of Carlsbad in Central California, and studied mechanical engineering. So that's the answer of the background. There's obviously a whole lot more to the story, but I'll give you that.
Okay. Well, let's take that one piece at a time. First of all, San Luis Obispo. I was born in Sierra Vista Hospital there in the Central Coast, and raised and graduated from San Luis Obispo back then senior high school in 1985. So my grandpa came to SLO in 1939.
Oh, wow.
So my dad was 1 year old when he came. And so our family has deep roots in SLO. None of us are there except for my son, who's getting ready to graduate from Poly in June. So,
it's a great town too. I mean, as I mentioned,
and I wanted to get out of there.
San Luis Obispo.
I know. And Corbin, this is, how kids are. I mean, I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. It's like, get me out of here. It's too small,
Right.
And then you try to spend the rest of your life trying to get back. It's like Carlsbad, same way. It's beautiful in Carlsbad.
Yes.
Fantastic place. Okay. Well, I want to know about your mom. So she studied music. Like, tell me a little bit about your mom at UCLA Music. She obviously had a lot of talent. What tell us about it?
She did. My mom has always been a people person, an extrovert, and has never, met a stage that she was afraid on. So,
Awesome.
she loved singing, still to this day, loves singing. Actually did a stint in Las Vegas where she was in a show. It was a minor part, but she had a brief period of doing that. I mean, I can't say. I mean, she never really did professional music beyond that. She got busy with raising us, and as a parent now, I realize really is a full-time job, having kids in the world. And trying to make their lives, as good, if not better, than your own. So, yeah, she's at the same time, she will, to this day, break into song whenever anyone gives her an occasion to. And she's got, she's got one shtick that she does from, she's a big musical fan. I mean, I was raised watching musicals on VHS. I mean, we would rent them from the library, and she'd force me to watch, My Fair Lady and The Music Man and all these. I'm glad that I watched those, because they're actually amazing stories, and
They are.
and the music is amazing. But at the time, I hated it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'd much rather be watching some action flick alcoholic or whatever, but I'm glad that she did that. So she can still to this day launch into any number of numbers from some of the biggest musicals. She's always been kind of a personality plus person. And my daughter definitely takes after that. My daughter, I talk about how I use metaphors a lot. My kids, I'm a writer. My kids get annoyed, but I once told my daughter, Kalia, that, we all have a bubble around us. It's kind of the personal space we occupy. And the bubble it's basically its dimensions are defined by how much space we take up by our personalities and, how much we talk and really the way people feel about us. So some people take up a smaller space because they're introverts and they're quiet. Some people take up a bigger space. And my daughter, like, her bubble is constantly bursting out. Like, like it can be overwhelming sometimes, just because she has so much going on inside of her, and it comes out. And so my mom very much is that way. Has always been, personality plus. Has always had a very big bubble, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I love the way you look at life like that. And it's incredible to look up and down the evolutionary chain and see how it manifests.
Hmm.
And you can absolutely, it's so funny because you can absolutely see it, because you'll have this little baby, like I'm thinking of my daughter too, and they'll do something and it's just like their grandma, like facial expression or a little
Oh,
singing,
yes.
right? And
Yes.
it's incredible. And it's such a joy in life. Like family is such a beautiful thing in life and such a joy in life. And to watch our kids develop and then look back at our parents. And it also helps you have a lot of empathy for your parents, doesn't
Oh
it?
my
When you're
God.
raising your own kids?
Seriously. Yeah. The older I get, I mean, I feel like I hit 40, and I mean, I was more sympathetic to my parents in my 30s with young kids in some ways, but I feel like now dealing, in the teenage years with my own kids, I mean, I absolutely feel like every bit of just, the empathy from my parents, what they endured, what they gave up,
Yeah.
what they sacrificed as all parents do, whether it's time or resources or whatever, in order to give their kids the best possible life. Yeah, it's you don't appreciate it when you're a kid. How could you? I mean, kids are beautifully narcissistic, like beautiful in the sense that they really can't be anything otherwise because they haven't had the experience to become sort of outside their own world. But so there's this sense of like you get to watch them be inside their world, and it can be beautiful. It can also be, challenging because you're like, well, you should care about other people too. Like, let's remember
Yeah.
that we're all in this together. We're a family. Like, it doesn't just the only thing, you think the only thing that matters is how you're feeling right now, and we think that is one dimension of what matters, and the rest of it is the rest of us. And remember that. And it's like knocking against a brick sometimes,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a beautiful thing to see kids grow and to be a part of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so your mom you have this fantastic mom, and your dad. You said he passed. I'm sorry about losing your dad. I lost my dad over 10 years ago now,
Hmm.
and I think about him every day. Tell our listeners a little bit about your dad.
Yeah, my dad grew up in Cleveland, and it's actually funny because I really haven't spent a lot of time in the city, but I was back there working on my next book project for quite a bit of time in the last couple of years, and so it was fun to go back and see some of the places he grew up. His dad was an engineer, and he was the third of four brothers. There was a lot of male energy in that house. And there was very little. It's funny. I mean, his mother was very much just kind of cut from that cloth. I mean, just had men running around, men and boys. So that was really the world my dad grew up in, was a world that was defined by men and boys. And he played sports. That was the thing, the place that he found himself, the place that he found, the most joy. He three-sport star in high school, and this was in the 1950s. And you're talking about, this is classic Americana. I mean, his brother Hal, his oldest brother, was the bat boy for the Cleveland Indians the year that they held the All-Star game in Cleveland. And so Hal actually was on the field with Mickey Mantle and Ted Williams and some of the all-time greats, and had a ball that was signed by all these guys, all the American League stars. That was like the holy grail, basically in our family. I mean, I remember one time getting to go downstairs and see Hank Powell's ball. I mean, it was kind of that. I mean, he didn't put it in a nice case in an office or something like you would expect. It was down in a box that it was just like, you've got to be freaking kidding me. I mean, like a ball like that is down in a box in the basement. But my dad, in some ways, his upbringing, they were very quiet German Lutheran people, and not a lot of vitality in their relationships. And my dad, really took refuge from that in sports. His coaches were always his most important relationships. And then after high school, he went to college at Kenyon, which is also the great, liberal
Oh,
arts
wow.
college in Ohio, and actually met my mother's oldest brother, John, my uncle John, who's since passed as well. But the two of them were best friends. They played on the ball fields together in baseball and basketball, and that's how my parents met. It was through John. So my dad then, after Kenyon, took some time off, and eventually ended up at USC doing a master's in education. He coached 1 year at Harvard, the Harvard basketball and baseball teams. And to the end of his life, he spoke of that year as like the very pinnacle of his lived experience. And it's a kind of sad thing, because my dad really, that was his great gift, was knowing how to, he wasn't like the absolute best player, but he was a very tender person and very smart about helping other people maximize their own, playing ability, on whether it was on the basketball court or on the baseball field. He did play football as well, though he hurt it himself playing football in college and kind of quit that. But to the end of his life, he kind of wished that he had stayed a coach. And frankly, looking back, I think there definitely were, I mean, as someone who loves him and wished that he had been able to attain the things that I think he could have, that it definitely was a kind of missed opportunity. He got derailed early in his life. And I say it derailed, for at the time, he thought it was the right sort of thing to do, but he got involved in a church that just took him in a very different direction from the way he was raised and from the way that all the people around him were raised, and that he threw himself into it. And it ultimately was a disaster for him personally, because the thing imploded, and it turned out to be really hurtful for him as a human being, and also to his faith. So that, that's kind of another story. And I look back at his life and think that because he did a lot of jobs later on in his life. I mean, he was very good with numbers, and so he ended up being a controller for a company in California, and just doing their books, and like a CPA, but in-house. And he did fine, but he never loved it. There was never any passion for it. It was a job to keep the lights on at home and pay the bills, which were astronomical in Southern California. And so I feel like my dad lost the chance at doing his passion early in life, and then later in life tried to reconnect with it, but it was just a little bit too late. So my dad wasn't just a sad story. He was a dear human. He was a lovely person, very tender, very kind, always open to a conversation. You always felt heard when you were with my dad. He often was the person in the back of the room that didn't speak up initially, but when he spoke up, he usually had something really important to say. A quiet man, but someone who was really a gentle, beautiful soul.
Yeah. Wow, Corbin. That's a beautiful tribute to your dad. And you just have such a way with words. I don't even want to say anything. I just want to keep letting you talk. So let's move on without commenting too much on that. Let me ask you, how many siblings did you have?
So I have one brother. He's about 3 years younger than me.
Okay, so two boys. And how about you? Were you really athletic? I mean, your dad loved sports. Were you into that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with a ball and a mitt in my hands. I mean,
No choice.
I was being groomed to play for the Yankees. I mean, as soon as like I could be old enough to hold a bat. I mean,
Are you a lefty? Are you a lefty?
No. I was a righty.
They didn't try to make you switch, did they?
Oh,
Like, my
no,
dad
not
always
at all.
wanted me to do that. You
Yeah,
gotta
I mean,
you gotta switch hit.
yes. Oh, yeah. My dad taught me how to switch hit. So,
Yeah.
I played in the local city league as a young player, and was for my last team before I moved on, before I went to middle school and sort of changed up what I was doing. But my 12-year-old team went 17-0 and won the the championship in the league that year and was on the all-star team. And my uncle, who actually did play minor league baseball after Kenyon, I mean, he had a shot with the Dodgers that didn't go anywhere, but and the minor leagues in baseball is basically like you're an indentured servant. I mean, it's like, hey, you can get on the field and we'll basically feed you with beans. We'll put you in the worst dumps in America. And we'll tell you that you're part of the Dodgers franchise. And meanwhile, you're watching the people who are on the show who are making millions of dollars and they get their face in the lights. And you're just like, man, I mean, that's quite an interesting world that I've often wondered. It's like, yes, it's fully voluntary, but it also feels somewhat exploitative of very young players. But my uncle loved the time that he was playing for the Dodgers, or at least for their farm club. And he would always look at me.
Was he in Lodi? Where was he? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I don't know.
That's the kind of places these guys. You're in Fresno, Lodi, Vice. I mean, it's. I don't.
You're in places you've never heard of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Only the people that live there have ever heard of the places where those clubs play. Yeah, it's a pretty wild world. So, but my uncle and my father both had been very good ball players obviously in college. And so they looked at me and both of them were grooming me from day one that you're going to be a pro. It's funny because my wife, we often go to the UVA baseball games and we have an opportunity. Of course, they won the national championship some years ago. And that was quite a fun run. My wife looks at me and says, you're 6'1", like you're 180, or it's a little bit, I weigh more now, but I used to. It's like you have the perfect physique of a baseball player. You could have, I mean, even she, to this day, she never watched me play. She's like, I bet you could have gone on. I'm like, oh, come on. That wasn't the life that I was designed for. But it was funny to watch my dad and my uncle's deep chagrin when I gave up baseball at the age of 12.
Okay, I want to hear this. By the way, you don't know, but I mean, I knew John. I met John in 1986. So John is like my friend. I played a lot of basketball. I'm a basketball fanatic, and John's everything fanatic. But he was at least, let's see, John died last year. He's got to be 20 years older than me, I would say. I'm 50, almost 56. So he was about 20 years older. But he had the body of a 25-year-old, like at 55 or 60.
Yes.
He was insane. Yes. And when he went on the court, it was all 100. I'm just assuming your dad's similar since it was his good friend, but it was 100% at all times between the lines. Like diving out of bounds. We're playing rec. He's diving, splitting his head open. He doesn't care. Fanatic. So I know the intensity of these conversations. So I want to hear 12-year-old Corbin. You're like an all-star. You're undefeated. You're an all-star. Why would you quit? I can hear this now.
No, actually, it was all in my head, and it's interesting because I had been pitching, and I hated pitching, but I had a good arm. So they and when you're playing that at that age, if you're going to the World Series, that wasn't something we did, but like. That's a different thing. You get really slotted in your field position. But on my team at that age, I played a number of different positions, mostly outfield, but sometimes a shortstop or second base and sometimes pitcher. And I had actually gotten hit a number of times on the mound, balls that were hit back hard off a bat and had injured me. I mean, injured my shin and my knee. And frankly, they instilled a degree of fear in me that I couldn't really shake. And so, like, as much as I love elements of the game, I didn't actually love the balls flying at high speed, in my direction. And so what's interesting is I was raised in a context in which around my dad, I played all kinds of things. I mean, we played basketball, we played tennis. And then later on, within a couple of years, I would discover volleyball. I mean, the world today for kids is so unbelievably competitive that I actually consider it injurious to childhood. Like we've created this club setting in which if you can pay for it, or even if you can't, you'll take out loans and put it on credit cards to put your kid on a club team to play at the highest level they can achieve in whatever sport it is that you're playing. And that didn't exist back then. I mean, so for me, I mean, I was just playing local ball, even though we were the best, our team was, but that left me with time to do other things. And so I had discovered a love for tennis. My dad loved playing tennis. So around the age of 12, I mean, I was going to transition from I graduated out of that that sort of youth league. And I was moving up, and I either was going to play on the baseball team at the local public school or not, or figure out some other arrangement. And I actually was then homeschooled those years. So it was easy for me to kind of say, all right, I'm going to transition away from baseball, but hey, by the way, dad and uncle, I can come back to it if I want. Like I could always do that in high school because my intention was to go back to the public high school. At the same time, life intervened. I ended up devoting 3 years to tennis, played competitively in Southern California. I mean, it's a hyper competitive environment. My parents did the club thing. I mean, this was rare, but to make any kind of headway in Southern California, you almost had to be trained by a pro. And so my mom would drive a bunch of kids down to this beautiful resort called Rancho Valencia in closer to San Diego City, three days a week. And then we would play tournaments on the weekend. And my dad took me to tournaments in LA and all over the place, San Diego, to the point where I got ranked in San Diego County as a tennis player. But then basically did the same thing. I was like about to enter high school. And I was like, if I'm going to move on from this, I'm going to have to devote my whole life to tennis. And I didn't really want to do that. So by then I had met my youth group and they introduced me to volleyball. And I just basically pivoted again and said, I'm going to play volleyball and I'll play for the Carlsbad High School volleyball team. And so, my parents, they're like whiplash. I mean, my dad, he had to mourn, my uncle especially mourned the fact that I never returned to baseball. He never let that go. Like every Christmas, I'd go to Indianapolis with my grandparents and my uncle would say some snide comment about how I could have been playing pinstripes for the Yankees. I mean, to his dying day, he would say that. He would make these snide comments about how I missed my calling, even as a writer, when he was proud of me, writing books and doing things. He's like, yeah, but you could have been, you could have been,
Could have been with the
playing for the
Yankees.
Yankees. Yeah. I don't know why the Yankees, because he didn't spend much time in New York City, but maybe it was just because they were always the best. I shouldn't say that because they aren't, but I mean, they're the storied team, right? Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle. I mean, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Okay. So tell me today, we all know you're a famous writer, but you've been writing all along. When did that start? When did you start figuring out, hey, I might be pretty good at this. I like telling stories. I like writing. Did that happen in your youth?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I wasn't raised in a context. I mean, my parents, they were very educated, both had master's degrees, but didn't have a lot of free reading material around. And so, I just discovered a love of reading when I was young and loved words, collected words like other kids collected baseball cards, which was totally weird. And I've gotten made fun of, always in a kind fashion, by my friends through the years and now by my children for the way that I'll just drop a $20 word in the middle of a sentence and they'll be like, what does that mean? And then I usually, for the sake of my kids, I usually follow it up with another definitional word that they don't understand either. And so that they just love that. They're like, if I define a word with a word they don't know either, they're just like, Dad, you're so annoying. That's their favorite word for me as teenagers. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So yeah, I mean, I've always loved words, always putting words together. And of course, you're a kid and you do writing in school, but I don't remember really thinking when I was a young person that I would ever write books. It really wasn't until, at my mid-teens, I'd say, discovered that I was good at writing long-form essays and AP classes. And I had teachers come and tell me, wow, you're actually really good at this, that you can just sit down and write an essay like this in the middle of class, just with a prompt. That was always fun to hear, right? People tell you you're good at something. But it wasn't until really I got to college and spent a tremendous amount of time. Obviously, I was an engineering student at Cal Poly. And it's funny because when you're in college and you have a heavy course load, you think you're so busy. And in reality, like you have so few obligations other than just showing up to class and taking your tests. I mean, it's just like, give me a break. Any college kid that tells me I'm just so busy and they're just like wiping their forehead, I'm like, just you wait. I mean, I'm not going to say anything to you. We all thought that. I took a heavy course load, but the truth is I had a lot of time. And with a lot of the time that I had, the extra time I spent reading, and I developed a kind of interest in making sense of the world through writing essays and reflections in my early college years. But I never showed them to anyone. Like I didn't actually write them for anyone. I would write letters on occasion just to be kind of old timey. Like I'd actually write formal letter to somebody I cared about, and that was fun. But I don't know where that came from exactly, but I've always been a little bit formal in my personality. And so and sometimes people have told me that I could have just as easily been born in the 19th century and probably would have liked the clothes better because I always like dressing up. I've always loved wearing suits, and I've always thought the way people dressed back in the Victorian period, particularly in England, obviously of a certain social status, was kind of cool. That it would have been fun to wear clothes like that. So yeah,
See, these are the nuggets. This
Yeah,
is
right,
what the
exactly.
public wants right here. They don't want to ask you about character development, or they want to know, does Corbin, see, now we know. By the way, do you have these, like, do you have some old suits like that you wear?
Oh gosh, you know what? The craziest story, and this is something that's like profoundly embarrassing, but you're asking, and so why not?
Yeah.
So I went to law school at UVA, and I moved east, and my thought was coming from California, which I loved. I always loved the dramatic beauty of the scenery in California. And frankly, now that I'm older, I really actually appreciate the laid back culture. But when I was a younger person, I was kind of, often through the movies, like thinking, man, it would be fun to live on the, more formal intellectual East Coast. And so, I moved to Charlottesville to go to UVA Law School, not knowing, knowing that it was a pretty laid, even though it was a top 10 law school, there was a pretty laid back atmosphere. What I realized in arriving here is that people weren't all that different from where I left. People at UVA were pretty laid back. Definitely wasn't Harvard or Yale, which was fine. It was actually, they were really cool people. But I remember thinking, man, I always thought lawyers would dress up and wear these long coats. And it was actually kind of silly, but because of course I came out in 2001. This was not 1930. And yet I would show up at law school wearing like my dad gave me this old raincoat you'd see the FBI wearing in like a 1960s show. People would look at me like, what is that? It wasn't trying to make a statement. I was just trying to be the lawyer. I was trying to like fit in, into a what was really in my mind, because nobody else was thinking that that's what a lawyer looked like in 2001. But I thought, hey, look, I'm on the East Coast and I'm at a top 10 law school. I can dress the part. And I looked around, I was like, where are all the kids wearing suits? And the only time anybody ever wore a suit was when they were interviewing, and otherwise they were out on the softball field, which I played a lot of softball. So, I love that part of UVA. So it was this weird dichotomy of me trying to fit into something that really didn't exist anymore, and the world. And then I met my wife, who quickly educated me about what the East Coast was really like, but not before I went to what was called, what we called the law ball, which was basically like a big party at the end of the year, for law students. And it was almost like prom, but not quite as silly. And, but it was for law students. So everybody got dressed up. Everybody wore a tux, or, most people wore a tux. And so I thought, man, this is my opportunity. I'll go out. And of course, this is back in the day before you could get a rented tux of any kind that you want online. That the world has changed. Back then, you had to go to the mall and rent a tux from from the store in the mall. But I thought, always wanted to wear tails, and this is my one opportunity. And so I went out and I got like this tail suit that really had that Elizabethan look to it. It was, I'm sure they were about to phase it out because I've never seen anyone else wearing that since. But I wore it, and I had invited this girl to the law ball, and I remember when she was this Southern belle, beautiful, and like from a sort of storied family. We weren't very close. She decided to go, and I don't think she really enjoyed herself that much. But I remember her face when I showed up to pick her up, looking at my tails, and was just like, she just smiled. And when I told that story later to my wife, she just was like aghast. How you went in? What? Who are you thinking you were going to be? Was anyone else there wearing tail? No. So there are moments when I'm like, yeah, it would be fun. The only time you can do this anymore is if you're in period pieces, like in cinema. And so I've always thought it'd be kind of fun to play Sherlock Holmes or something, just for the wardrobe. More than anything else, like just for the wardrobe. So yeah, that's a side of me that I've never shared publicly.
Well, it's out there now, and
There it
and
is.
are there photos available of this law ball UVA? I mean, this could be.
This is thankfully, look, I mean, I've got to say, thank God it was before the iPhone. So,
Yes,
uh,
yes. Oh, yeah.
all that stuff is just in my head. I mean, people took photos back on the little point and shoot cameras, but I didn't take a camera that night. My date did not take a camera. I think both of us are very thankful that there's no photographic
There's no
evidence
evidence.
of that
Well,
evening.
unfortunately for me, Corbin, I think maybe what you wore was my leftover tux from my wedding. We got we got married in 1987, and I wore tails. I did not. Well, Michelle will point out if I'm wrong or not, but I don't believe I chose that myself. But maybe I did. But I definitely wore it, and all my groomsmen too. So
Yes.
it's
Well,
hilarious.
that was the thing, right? I mean,
Yep.
and it seemed like we got married in 2003, and it honestly felt like within a couple of years after our wedding, the whole wedding world transformed. And I
Yeah.
think it may have just been that the millennials took over they were the ones getting married, and their ethos and their sort of interest in style was so different so we are right on the border between Gen X and millennial.
Yeah.
And there's this 3-year period of like birthdays from say 78 to 80 where people call us Xenials because in weird ways, like we swing either X in certain ways or millennial in other ways. And yet once the millennials firmly took over, I feel like the whole wedding world changed. And it was amazing because like my wife we'd go to weddings or we'd see other friends' weddings. And it was just like, it looks so different. I mean, our wedding really had a more formal way to it. My wife had a veil, a long train, whatever it's called, with the dress that goes out back. And when we got married in a very formal old church in Lewisburg, West Virginia, where she's from, and, in this big old beautiful white church. And it felt like even within a couple of years after, people were getting married outdoors everywhere, like in barns. They were, even the brides were, not all of them were wearing white. Like they'd given up on the veil, they'd given up on the train, all these formalities. The guys were just wearing suits. I mean, it was like the whole world dramatically changed within a couple of years. So yeah, the tails you wore, the tails that I don't know where they went. That, having been to Africa and having seen the giant bales of American clothing, leftover clothing, donated clothing that just get dumped in the middle of African cities, they probably ended up in Zambia. Who knows who's wearing them?
Along with like San Antonio Spurs basketball championship shirts. When we went over to Africa, I saw so many NBA championship shirts.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Everywhere. It was crazy.
Yeah.
It was crazy. Okay, so let me follow up on this. You said your parents both master's degree levels, and you said we didn't have much free reading material available around the house, I believe. Is that because their faith tradition, the way they thought about the world? I mean, you have books all over the place. I can see them there.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, look.
Why didn't you have reading material available in your home?
It wasn't as much that I didn't have. I mean, my parents would buy any book I wanted. I mean, at one point I had the entire Hardy Boys collection. I mean, literally like 250 books. I'd scrounged around from every used bookstore in the world, to collect every last Hardy Boys book. And then I ended up, to my great current chagrin, because I would have loved to give that to my son when he was younger, I sold the entire collection to the local middle school for a couple grand, at a point when I could use the money. So it was not that I didn't have books around. It was much more that, my mom neither of my parents read any fiction at all. I mean, that was like, there was zero fiction. So if my mom read anything, it was the Bible, the King James version of the Bible. He'd quote a lot of it. And so, yeah, for her, it was like, that was kind of the only book that she was all that interested in reading. She would read other books related to faith from time to time, but there wasn't a whole lot of range. My dad read a lot for his job, and he was very interested in reading about the market. He was always hopeful that he would figure out a way to game the system, mostly in commodities trading, which turned out to be not a very lucrative avocation that he had going on. But he read extensively about businesses and about commodities and stocks and whatever. So there was always, like, the newspaper was always around back in the day when the newspaper actually existed and it wasn't online. It wasn't that my parents didn't like, and they didn't have a literate impulse. It just, they didn't they didn't really have an interest in the kind of literature that that I discovered in my teens and then my 20s of like the wide world of books. And I had to figure that out myself. So I started with fiction. I remember my mom gave me, in fact, I think it was one of John Grisham's books when I was 12, maybe, or 11. Can't remember which one it was, but it was one of his early books. And I think that was the age. I mean, because he had started, his first book was published in 89. So yeah, yeah, would have been one of his first books. Maybe it was The Firm. It might have been Pelican Brief. But regardless, I remember starting with that and loving lawyer stories. Then got into Tom Clancy and reading about the military, Patriot Games, and all of those books. And got into Clive Cussler, which was more of an adventure. And what's interesting is that I didn't grow up reading a lot of the classics. I had to later in life, in college, and then, I mean, obviously in English class, I had to read Shakespeare and other things, but I didn't appreciate them until much later. I had to come to the classics on my own and play catch up. Where my wife, on the other hand, was raised by a family who very much appreciated the classic literature. And she was just raised reading, every classic book under the sun. So regardless, I mean, I started out with fiction, then I'm sort of migrated toward nonfiction, but really more nonfiction related to philosophy and theology. I developed a real interest in that in college. And so it was funny because in college, I was a mechanical engineering student, but I spent most of my time reading fiction, playing my piano, and reading philosophy and theology. And my friends who spent their free time tinkering on stuff and building things and inventing stuff, they would constantly look at me and say, "Your grades are better than ours. That's not fair because you are not an engineer. Like, why are you even here?" And they would say it kindly, but they meant it, and they were right. And so, at the age of 20, I discovered I was sitting. You didn't ask this question, but I'll answer it. I was sitting in the first class of the fall quarter at Cal Poly. This would be my junior year, and it was a material science class. And I got there early, walked in, sat down in an empty classroom, and it was almost as if a voice spoke to me. It was really this kind of epiphany. And I asked that very same question: why am I here? I mean, not just in this room, but like, why am I doing this? Why am I pursuing a mechanical engineering degree if I'm really honest, I don't want to be an engineer? And then it was pretty easy for me to admit that to myself. Much harder to figure out what to do when I'm already 2 years into a program that was designed to be almost a 5-year program. Everyone at Cal Poly in engineering took 5 or 6 years to get out. I was on track because of AP courses to get out in 4 years. But if I switched in midstream, I was like, I'm going to have to start over. I mean, and then what would I do? So I had, this follow-up question. Once I admitted that I was not in the right space, at least in the right course of study, I had to ask myself what I would want to do. And I asked a question. I can't remember where it came from, but it just kind of came to me. It was like, what would I do if money was not an object? Which money was. I mean, thankfully, Cal Poly was inexpensive in those days. I don't know what it is anymore, but it was very inexpensive. My dad was paying for it, but just barely. He'd taken out some loans to cover some of the room and board. And so it wasn't like I had the option of going anywhere I wanted, doing anything I wanted. But for me, it was almost a question of like, what's in your heart, Corbin? Like, what is it that you would do if you could do anything? And my thought was either I'd go to law school or I'd go to seminary. And then I investigated why law school, why seminary. And I thought to myself, well, being a lawyer, especially, and I was reading both Grisham's books and also a civil action, Jonathan Harr's A Civil Action, which was really inspiring for me ultimately to go to law school. I was like, I would love to be a lawyer because, lawyers can get to the truth and they're smart, they're intellectual, they're interested, they ask good questions. Now, I always thought it'd be fun being in the courtroom. I was never afraid of public speaking. So there was that. But then there was this also, I come from a deep faith tradition. And so for me, and as a person of faith, I thought it'd be interesting to study theology. But then I thought, do I want to be a minister? I mean, am I actually thinking about like an MDiv going into ministry, or am I just really saying what I'd actually like is to get like a theological PhD, just study theology, but never do anything with it, just study it for the fun of it? And I had to say, yeah, that was more the interest than going into ministry. And so I was like, well, that's not probably the smartest course of action. I need to be practical. I should get a law degree. So the very same day, I mean, all that happened in one very hyper distilled moment of time. And then I left that class and I walked up to the bookstore at Cal Poly and bought it wasn't online back then, the Princeton Review of Law School.
LSAT. Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I remember
And
that.
so, I started reading that
Princeton
night
Review.
and landed on UVA almost immediately as like this perfect mixture of like, it's the East Coast and it's a top 10, but it's also apparently very collegial. Of course, I learned that it is, but it wasn't like Harvard, this hyper intense, hyper cutthroat environment where people are really trying to best each other. The way I read about it, it was like Virginia was a friendlier top 10. And I also read about Charlottesville, the history, the lawn at UVA, which is one of the most beautiful collegiate environments in the world, and Thomas Jefferson and all that sort of that history. And I was always an American history buff. So I thought UVA, and it was funny because as soon as I started talking about, maybe I should go to law school, it was like every person that I knew at Cal Poly, every person oh yeah, you definitely need to go to law school. Like, oh yeah, why were you here in the first place? And so then I had to answer the question, okay, am I going to finish my course of study in engineering for 2 more years, including going through the grueling process of my senior project, which I was deathly afraid of. I was far more interested in the logic of doing the math and the physics than I was in building anything. So I knew I'd have to do that. But then the alternative was staying longer and having to switch to say math or something else, poli-sci, start over. So I decided to stick with it and push through the next 2 years of engineering, which was tough. I mean, Cal Poly is a great engineering school, and therefore they made it very difficult on me to coast to the exit. I really wanted to coast. That was not possible.
Yeah, I can tell you're not a coast person. And for our listeners that don't know, this is like one of the hardest engineering schools to get in the country.
It is. Yes.
They're all impacted. It's lots of really smart people that ace the SAT and get perfect grades and don't get in. Put it that way. So,
yes.
So you earned your way in, and then you earned your way through, and you have this awesome degree that at least you don't use it for maybe the purpose intended, right?
No, I don't. I mean, I'm grateful that I can help my son who's very math inclined. I can help him with his math. Another sort of little anecdote is that I loved, in a weird way, like, how do you love something like this? But I loved calculus. Like, I actually loved doing calculus, which is bizarre. It's like, what part of my brain, was so happy with that? But I actually that was the one part of engineering that I missed, is that when I went to law school, I was around people who the only numbers they cared about had dollar signs attached, and nobody had ever used Excel. And so it was like, and I had become a Microsoft Excel, professional. I mean, I used it like a disc jockey uses whatever programming. It's like, so for me, the idea of not ever using math again, not ever using Excel, was actually kind of sad. And so anytime in a case that I would be able to whip out a spreadsheet and amaze the lawyers or my clients with my Excel knowledge, I would. And then one time, my wife actually came home. Must have been early in our marriage. She came home and I was actually sitting using some of my leftover engineering paper, which, for people who don't know what that is, it's like these green sheets that have little grids, and they're beautiful for organized people because you can organize anything vertically or horizontally on engineering paper. So I was actually doing calculus for fun. I just was like, I don't want to forget this. And I'm in my mid-20s and I'm just sitting down, like, scribbling. My wife was like, what are you doing? And is that related to a case? No. What is it? Well, I almost was sheepish to admit it. I was like, it's differential equations. And she was like, what? Like, and I was like, yeah, I really like doing this, but I know I'm never going to use it. So I don't want to lose it. And she just gave me a look that was just like, I don't know who you are, who I married. Like, this is completely bizarre. And of course, I've forgotten it all now. So, sadly, if it's in my brain, I don't know how to access it, which is, I wish I could. But then again, what would I do with it? It was completely useless to me now.
Exactly. That's awesome. That's awesome. I love your story. It in some ways it parallels my own, and my listeners have heard this before, but I really just wanted to play football, because, I mean, going back, I think because my dad wanted me to play football. I really wanted to play basketball. I just wasn't as good at basketball as I was football, and football seemed to be like maybe I could play in college. And then I got hurt, and I was good at math and science like you. And so it was always, well, you got to go become an engineer. If not engineering, because everybody knew I was like such an extrovert and liked to talk and loved politics, and everybody was like, well, maybe you could go computer science. If not engineering, computer science. Well, I didn't want to do that either. And so long story short is I ended up not staying at Poly and pursuing engineering. I ended up not going back to college till I was 26. So it's a little, it took a longer route. But in the meantime, I have gone to seminary and I have gone to law school. So
Fascinating.
I understand the desires and the fascination with studying both. I mean, law school is an amazing journey. I think I loved law school. I loved learning how people think about, society, politics, law. It ties everything together. So I'm so thankful for that experience. And then I enjoy practicing as well. I'm not going to become a writer. I know a lot of lawyers that say that, right? They're working on their
Oh my
book.
gosh.
They're working on their book.
Seriously.
And seminary is obviously a fascinating, very fascinating in very similar ways. And I always tell people, because I did not graduate from seminary. I went and took classes in the evenings for a couple of years and then decided while I was in seminary to go to law school. But law school, everybody's always worried about the reading load, but I'll tell you what, it's way lighter than seminary.
Huh.
Seminary leading road, or at least at Dallas Theological Seminary, where I attended classes, was enormous.
I bet. Dallas is tough. Yeah.
Yeah. So you learn a lot. And mainly what I learned was nobody agrees on anything.
Seriously.
And so in some ways I started to lose my faith through that process. But I want to talk to you because it sounds like you're still a person of faith. You're an incredibly brilliant person. You're clear thinking. And so I want to sort out for the listeners, for myself, for your readers, a little bit about this, if you don't mind. So let's start with, you said that you were in a youth group that was really pivotal or fundamental, I think is the word you used for you. So talk me through that. Your parents had a bad experience. We're going to leave that behind. They move you out to Carlsbad. So talk to me a little bit about your faith, your youth group, that type of journey.
Yeah. I mean, look, I like I said, my mom, her reading material was the King James version of the Bible. And so I grew up learning the scriptures, and they're very antiquated, although sometimes very beautiful language from the 16th century. Or I guess, thereabouts. But for me, faith was always a very personal thing. I always had a sense of the great beyond. I mean, that the mysteries of life, if they had an explanation, if there was truth with a capital T, it lay beyond what our human minds could access, but that I was always curious to ask the questions and pursue as much knowledge, as much wisdom as one could. This was just an instinct in me. It wasn't necessarily something that was inculcated. Like I said, my dad had a really bad experience. My mom had been a part of that, but she held fast to her kind of way of seeing the world and to her faith. And to her credit, I mean, my mom has always had a very real and big faith. And I appreciate that. And I learned by watching to some extent. Simply, there were a number of times in my childhood where we really came to the edge because my dad had lost a job. There was one instance where my dad lost his job, and then my mom, who was doing a business, multi-level marketing business from home, that company cratered, and we were in really dire straits. And I remember my mom telling us that we were going to be okay, that God was going to take care of it. And I remember watching that a door opened for our family to move into a new home. I mean, we were actually, at that point, we were also renting, and our landlord had given us notice. And so we were 30 days away from having to move out of a house with two parents, neither of whom had a job. And it was pretty terrifying for a young teenage boy like me to, who's really responsible, to look at it and think, where are we going to live? Like, if you guys don't have income. And I knew they didn't have a whole lot of savings. And so I just remember my mom, with great confidence saying, don't worry about it. And it was actually really beautiful, because in this crazy way and I'll just say it, the way that God moves, I mean, something opened for us to move into a house right down the street, that had a beautiful backyard pool. I mean, the woman had been trying to sell the house forever and nobody wanted to buy it. even though it was gorgeous, it was because she was asking way too much for it. And so my mom went to her and just knocked on the door and said, "Hey, would you mind if we lived here until you sell the house and, we can rent it?" And the woman said yes. She should not have said yes. She should have asked for references. She should have asked for, "Hey, who's your employer?" She didn't ask any of those questions. She just said, "I kind of like you. You can live here." And so we ended up living in that house for the last 2 years of high school. I say that as a credit to my mom, because as much as I would say my way of looking at God and the world has definitely expanded vastly from the way I was raised. I still credit my mother with giving me a reason to believe that there is a God and that he is still active and in the world. And in fact, that we are actually moving in his story. I mean, I think that's the thing that over the course of the years become more and more real to me as I've developed my own faith, as I've experienced so much of the world, interacted with people from every faith background and no faith background at all, dealt with existential questions in my own life, dealt with death, dealt with losing loved ones, dealt with the death of dreams, or just really profound questions that I come back to this just fundamental core of a belief that there is a God who loves the world. And in fact, that his invitation to each of us as creatures in this world is very simple. Do you want to be a part of my story? I mean, really, that's the invitation. And we can all say yes in different ways. And it looks very, very different. I mean, I too, fast forwarding here, but just riffing off of something you said about going to seminary and finding that everyone disagrees. I mean, I was raised in a world in which there wasn't a lot of disagreement. And then I went to youth group, was surrounded by people who came from a different kind of theological background than I did. And yet I fell in love with them. And I spent so much time around them and loved, being with them and singing their songs and reading the scriptures and doing the things that we did. And then I went to college and had a wholly different experience with a whole new group of people that thought differently from me. And what I came to just appreciate is that it's like the world is profoundly complex. And as human beings, we see, as the scriptures say, we see through a glass darkly. That's true about God. That's true about everything. We see through glass darkly. And if we want to try to adhere to a belief that we have all the truth, I mean, and this is true for religion, it's true for politics, it's true for everything under the sun. If we have that fundamentalist attitude, and I've seen that fundamentalist attitude with atheists. I mean, with people,
absolutely,
with scientists, who are just so certain that their view of the world is the only way of seeing. I mean, it's foolhardy, and the only way you can do that is you have to build these walls, these epistemic walls around, and it's like you have to create a system, like a solar system. And so long as you stay within the gravitational orbit of that solar system, everything makes sense. But in order to stay within that gravitational system, you have to keep everyone who would cause you cognitive dissonance if you really engaged with them. You have to keep them at a distance, and you have to other them. You have to say they're wrong. You have to say that, they're stupid, they're ignorant, whatever, in order to stay within that system. But eventually, if you really open yourself up to people of different backgrounds, different philosophies, different faith persuasions, what you find is you'll actually end up leaving that orbital system, and you'll look back and recognize that it only held together so long as you were within the gravitational field. The world's far too big for any one solar system. It's like the universe. You can't possibly define the universe simply by reference to any one solar system or any one galaxy. If we are, as human beings, simply knocking on the door of heaven, I mean, there's such a vastness out there. And so there was a point in my life where I came to embrace something I call epistemic humility. I've spent a lot of time doing philosophy. And so epistemology was always an interesting question. Like, how do we know what we know? We claim to know a lot of things. And yet, what's the ground upon which those knowledge claims stand? I mean, what is the basis of our saying X, Y, and Z? And so I spent a lot of time thinking about epistemology. And what I realized is all philosophers argue too. They'll argue till they're blue in the face everything under the sun. And so it's like, okay, well, where do I land? Do I land in a place of total skepticism and agnosticism where I say I can't really believe anything, right? Other than maybe I think, therefore I am. Or do I come to a place of humility where I say, I believe there are things we can know. And I think there are things we can know with really good ground, whether through reason or experience. But also I need to remain, regardless of what conclusions I reach, I need to remain open to the possibility that I am seeing things incompletely or even incorrectly. And therefore, and that's really been where I went. So it was a combination of philosophy and theology, and my own faith journey came to a place where I've now, over the course of 20 years of being an adult, more than 20 years, I mean, I've been in every kind of church, worshiped in churches all over the world, every kind of faith tradition. I've sat down with Muslims. I've read the Quran. I've spent time with Hindus in India. I've read the Bhagavad Gita and then the Ramayana and the Mahabharata from India. I mean, I've read about Buddhism and sort of spent time with people in that direction. I've not become these things, but I've opened myself to, this is the way, this is their history, this is the way they see the world. And I can look at, even though I am very much a Christian, a follower of Jesus, I can look at a Hindu or a Muslim or a Buddhist or an agnostic or an atheist with compassion and empathy and say, it isn't that they're benighted. It's not that I think they're wrong about everything. I happen to look at the mysteries of the universe through the lens that I see, but they also are looking through a lens and they see a lot of light too. And beyond the light that they see, I can see beauty in their lives. I can see the kindness and goodness and love that they share, their family connections. I can see all kinds of the things that I call the fruit of the spirit in their lives. And if I can see that, then I have to admit something that this beautiful Chinese woman that I met in Malaysia told me. We were having this very same conversation, and she's very much a Christian, but operates in a Muslim context in Malaysia. And she was just like, the spirit is always at work, always at work. The only question is, are we seeing the work he's doing? And I always thought, yeah, that's right. I mean, I want to have the eyes to see, and I want to be a part of that. So I've given you a very long-winded answer to that question, and one that's bounced around a lot. I'm happy to follow up on anything if you'd like.
No, that's all fantastic. I mean, the way this God, and I'm going to paraphrase back to you, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but this God that you're experiencing, you're talking about, you're worshiping, is a God of love and a God who is active in the world to support, to care, to bring about light and goodness and joy and peace and all this. And that seems like a healthy take on religion, at least from my limited viewpoint. Again, how does a kid that was born in 1967 in San Luis Obispo know anything? Right. I mean, it's like I'm supposed to figure out the great mysteries of the world, but
right.
That's what we're doing. I mean, I was born when I was born. I had the faith experience I had. I lost that particular faith. And so, moving forward, I experienced the world. And you say, how, are we seeing what the Spirit is doing? She said. And the way I would answer that is, I hope so. But as we see it, I mean, everybody views it differently depending upon their cultural biases, their genetics. There's so much that goes into how we view the world and how we know what is real and what is not.
Sure.
And so I love your epistemic humility approach. I think that's absolutely correct. Again, the moment I think I have it all figured out, I'm lost.
Yeah.
I bring this book up. It seems like every freaking podcast, so maybe I have to go back and read it. It's been several years, but it's Peter Rollins wrote a book called The Idolatry of God, Breaking Our Addiction to Certainty. It's such a beautiful work, and it really helped me understand others. And that, listen, anything I build in my mind, by definition, is an idol. It's this thing that I figured out. It doesn't have to be if I'm aware of the potential of it being, then it doesn't have to be an idol. But a lot of times that certainty, we just want to make sure we know and understand and have it all figured out, rather than sitting back and listening to the Muslim and believing their testimony, or listen to the Hindu and believing their testimony. And I think you said it more brilliantly than I, but if there's a God, then God's light is emanating through them as well.
Yes.
And it's for us to pick up on that. We have to reinterpret it because it doesn't fit our Jesus story. But maybe it does. And maybe there's a way we can rework the Jesus story where it encapsulates all that. And many of my progressive Christian friends have done that.
Yeah.
And as you were talking about God, it reminded me of the way Rob Bell, I don't know if you know Rob Bell,
Yes.
describes
I don't know him
God.
personally, but yes, I know of him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's such a great writer, and the way it's so accessible, and it makes me want to worship that God. It makes me
Yeah.
want to follow and experience that God. And as you described it, I felt the same way. I mean, there's no, I want to judge fundamentalism, and meaning not judge to hell or anything, but judge
Yeah.
to say, to break down so that people can escape it. And
Sure.
I agree that happens both on the faith side and on the science side.
Yeah.
I don't believe that's true science. True science is, yes, we're looking to falsify, but we're skeptical and we're holding it lightly because
Sure.
we know no matter what. I mean, just look at Newtonian physics. It's beautiful and it seems all encompassing, and at the time universal as we thought it was. Oops.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Within the bubble, within the system,
Exactly.
it works
Yep.
perfectly.
Yep.
But now we learn about quantum physics.
Right.
And there's a whole other reality that we're just scratching the surface on. I mean, a lot of your friends, I'm sure that you're in EE with, understand it, and you understand it a lot better than I do. But quantum physics is at a level now where they're applying the principles with quantum computing. They're applying the principles of many applications, and it works. And so we know it's reality, even though
Yep.
it makes no sense. And so, I mean, to the logical mind, it makes no sense, but that's the reality of the world we live in. At the same time, Newtonian physics is I mean, jump off the building. Don't jump off the building, but
Right.
drop something off a building. And
Yeah.
that's the reality too. And so brilliant minds are trying to figure out, how do we synthesize this to have a global understanding? But right now we don't. So add
Right.
into that, that's where I add into it faith. So faith to me is, okay, there's something, I look at my wife, it's something happens in here that evolutionarily doesn't make sense.
Sure.
I should look at her to reproduce, to procreate, but not these feelings, not love. Love is so risky and it hurts so much.
Yeah.
And then you have these little babies, and you see a sunset, Corbin. You see
Oh my
a
gosh.
sunset. It happens every freaking day, but you see
Yes.
it, and there's this joy that builds up inside you. Science doesn't do a good job explaining it.
No, that's right.
There's something going on, and there's this also, like, I see the homeless man on the street. We were in Long Beach the week before last, and I'm walking down the street, and I pass a guy. He didn't necessarily look homeless. He looked old. He looked a little tired, but he was, as I walked by him, we could have bumped him. It was we didn't, but we could have bumped because we were on a street, just small sidewalk. And I just said, "How you doing today?" Didn't even look at him, didn't stop, kept walking with my wife. He was like, actually, I can't remember what he said, but something like, "I'm a little hungry," or maybe not too well, or whatever. So I stopped and turned around and looked at him. And I look him in the eyes, and I just see this human.
Hmm.
And I just think, I don't like giving money to people on streets because it's not all that helpful to
Yeah.
the problem, to solving the huge problem, but it solves that guy's problem. And I was like, I'm gonna give him $20. So I just grabbed him, give him $20. I walked back, give him $20. And he just says, "Can I give you a hug?"
Hmm.
He gives me a hug. And Corbin, this is humanity. It's so real. He gives me this hug. And now I'm like, I can feel it. And tears start coming in my eyes. Oops, I dropped my headphones. And he says, "That's God working you," or something. And I have to be the transparent person. I said, "You know what? I really don't have faith anymore, but I'm glad you're going to have something to eat," or something like that. Whatever I said. And he said, "That's okay." He says, "The Holy Spirit's in you." He looks at me right in the eyes and said, "The Holy Spirit's in you." It's such a beautiful moment. I can't even remember why I started telling this story, but the
No, well,
humanity.
I mean, the truth is that why is it that very few people like really criticize Jesus, and yet the critiques of Christianity are legion? It's because Christians have been both the very best and the very worst emblems of Jesus Christ. Like we have been both the very best and the very worst ambassadors of the gospel. And when we are at our very best, we do the things that he did. We heal the sick. We release the captives from their bondage. We work for justice. We care about the poor. We meet people just like you met that homeless man on the side of the road, and we treat them as a human being with dignity equal to ourselves. We show love to people who are unloving and unlovable. We go out of our way to welcome the stranger and the outcast. I mean, when Christians actually behave the way Jesus walked in the world, we are the light. Like what we do actually makes the world become the world we all want to live in. It is fundamentally inspiring. I mean, the person of Jesus, to this day, like my faith, the anchor of my faith is that man. It's not some ethereal notion in the heavens, because the truth is, like, talk about physics and quantum physics and all that. The physicists these days are actually theists. For the most part, or deists at minimum. There aren't that many physicists left who are atheists. All of them recognize that they are on a daily basis knocking on the door of heaven. That there is something beyond what they can see that they can't explain. So, like a guy like John Polkinghorne, whose books I read when I was younger, who's an Anglican priest and also an Oxford or Cambridge physicist. There are so many people like that who recognize, okay, well, if we pursue science, at least physics, to its very end, we actually realize we get into this fuzzy zone, this gray area, where there seems to be something beyond that we can't explain. We can't touch it. Our theories can't touch it. But what theories we have, though they don't necessarily cohere together, we're still looking for the cosmic unified theory. Like they're still true. Like the individual theories are true, but there's something beyond. And I think all that's really fascinating and really interesting. But at the end of the day, that doesn't make a difference for the homeless guy you gave a hug to. I'm much more interested today, and this is really where my faith has gone. My faith has gone from being super heady and theoretical to being much more personal. It's like, if I'm going to ground my faith in anything, I want to actually follow in the real life footsteps of Jesus of Nazareth. Like, I want to be a part of his way of living life. And his way of living life is not a judgmental way. His way of living life was not at all a kind of precursor of fundamentalism. No, in fact, what you see, the fundamentalists in his day were the Pharisees. And they were the people that he was constantly kindly criticizing and telling, hey, look, you guys need to recognize that the real work of God is what I'm doing. I'm healing people on the Sabbath because guess what? Like, God cares more about the person than the holiday. Like, he was constantly shaking up orderly religion, and because orderly religion becomes all about the humans and so much less about like a divine reality that's mysterious, that we really is beyond us, and that's aspirational, that we're constantly being invited into. So for me, it was like, and really a lot of my journey as a storyteller, and I love to kind of link it this way, is that my journey as a storyteller really informed my faith, the groundedness of my faith, the personal essence of my faith, because I went out into the world and the idea was, okay, I had been writing books nobody wanted to read that were much more autobiographical and philosophical, much more like Voltaire's Candide, which worked really well in the 18th century, but isn't necessarily great fodder for the bestseller list in the 21st century. So my wife had this idea, well, why don't you write about injustice? A Walk Across the Sun came from that. We had seen a film about human trafficking and we were moved by it. And I, at that point, was starting to really understand, as a person in the world, as a lawyer, both through my work and also through just thinking about the world, how much injustice was out there. And I really wanted to be a part of the solution. And I was really starting to press into, on the faith side, the fact that justice is such a fundamental value of the God that I worship, the Judeo-Christian God who is revealed through the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament scriptures. Justice is everywhere in the scrolls of Isaiah, all the way from the Exodus story of God's people being slaves in Egypt, and then wandering through the desert and having been rescued from slavery, through all of the exilic prophets that talk about how important it is to welcome the stranger and do justice to the widow and to care for the orphan and to always be welcoming to the outsider, that is the ethos. And then to see the way that Jesus walked with such concern for the downtrodden, the outcast, all the people in society that society very easily would like to wash down the gutter. I realized, oh, this is where faith meets the road. It's great to go to church and worship, but if you're not living a life in keeping with the ethos of Jesus, then you're really not living a Christian life. You can go worship, you can believe whatever you believe, and that's great. But like, if you're not actively engaged in some way, if you're through your church, through a nonprofit, through your own volunteer work, through your vocation, actively engaged in actually dealing with the people that Jesus came to heal, to love, to save, to free, then are you really following him? And that, that for me as a storyteller, I went then out into the world and brought home these stories and met with people who were doing the work of justice in the world and freeing the captives and helping people who were outcast. And I was in every place that I went, whether it was India with a walk across the sun, or Zambia with the Garden of Burning Sand, or East Africa, Somalia, even, with the Tears of Dark Water, to Bangladesh and Malaysia, Jordan with A Harvest of Thorns, and then Eastern North Carolina with Wastelands. I mean, every place I went, I found my heart gravitated toward the people who were actively engaged in doing the work of justice and lifting up the broken and the needy and caring for those who were, binding the wounds of the wounded. Like, I recognize that, and it's been my experience, though, that's where God is at work. It's somebody, I forget her name, but there's this writer who actually talks about her own faith and once said that she recognized that God is at work in the places where, that break our hearts. Like, wherever, like, how do you want to engage the world? Like, how can you engage the world? Well, look out there and find the place where your heart breaks and go there. And it's actually such a remarkable way of thinking, because if your heart is broken by some injustice in the world, it may not be that you can solve it, but it may be that you can engage with others who are engaged in solving it. Like, that is an active way, I think, of actually following Jesus in a world where in so many church contexts, it feels like Jesus is reduced to stained glass in a big cathedral, or reduced to a creed, or reduced to a theological system that you've got to hold on to tightly lest you lose your faith and go to hell. I mean, for me, it's like, no, Jesus is today in the same place he was 2,000 years ago. He's still healing the broken. He's still lifting up and breaking the captives out of their prisons. Like, he's still doing that work today. And that's where, if we're authentic Christians, that's where we need to be. And that's where I've always gone with my stories.
I really like that, Corbin. It's fascinating as you're saying these things. I'm thinking the creed, the formula, it seems like in modern times, is what Christianity in a lot of ways has become. I have to believe the right things to be a Christian, whereas what you seem to be saying, and by the way, what I see a lot in the scriptures, is being a Christian simply means I follow Jesus and do those things he asked me to do, not believe. I guess I'm believing those things, right? So, well, I can meet with the woman at the well, even though it might be forbidden in my culture, because there's purpose behind that, right?
Yeah.
It's like there's love, there's that interaction. Maybe it's hugging a homeless person for us, whatever, getting down there and touching them. But Jesus asks us to do these hard things. You know what I mean? He literally asks us, he doesn't ask us, but in Acts, we see they're selling, the followers of him, they're selling their things and making sure that everybody's needs are taken care of. But we live in a culture where Christians live in giant houses and drive fancy cars, and they have homeless people sleeping outside their house. It's the incongruency between what people profess to believe and their actions is difficult for a lot of us. And we're going to call them on that hypocrisy. And when there's people of faith like you who are living it out, we want that to be the shining example. And by the way, it's not just Christian. And I know you're not just saying that. That's your context. That's your faith
Sure.
story. But if I embrace the Four Noble Truths, am I a Buddhist? I don't have to say I'm a Buddhist, but if I practice mindfulness, and you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
If I do these things, if I'm, Gandhi lived, it seems like he lived out a lot of the principles of Jesus, even though he didn't identify as a Christian.
Yes.
So to me, I look at that and was like, he was a Christian because he did the
Absolutely.
things Jesus asked people to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And so anyways, that's fascinating. Let us shift gears just a bit. So you had your faith journey during high school. This church was important to you, obviously. And then you're learning about writing. You're starting to read some really good works. You go off to Cal Poly, you spend a couple of years, and you said, while you're doing all this incredibly difficult coursework, you're reading fiction, you're playing the piano, you're discussing and reading philosophy, and then you decide to go to law school. That moment you said, why am I here? By the way, you never answered that question, and maybe you don't know. I mean, maybe it's just all your programming and parents and genetics, and it brought you to that moment. You're good at math and science. But if you can answer that, did you figure out why you were there? Was it because
Yeah,
of
it
your
was.
parents?
Yeah.
And then number two, okay, take us to law school, because you go to law school. Were you planning on practicing law, or did you still want to be a writer?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I know exactly why I was in engineering school. It was because my dad basically had told me since I was a very young man that he wished that if he had not been able to stay with coaching, that he would have gone into engineering because his father was a mechanical engineer, and so my dad always thought that apart from just loving the playing or coaching athletes, which is not always is something that even someone very good at it can sustain over the course of a life. It's very hard. He would have preferred to be an engineer. So basically, I grew up with a dad who was telling me that about his own narrative, and then of course I was good at math and science. And what I found through my years in high school, and I've thought about this quite a lot in context of my own kids' education. It's actually kind of sad that in high school we don't give kids more options to diversify and kind of figure out what they're interested in, and then we ask them at the age of 18 to make a decision about, where they want to go to college and what they want to do with their lives. Because it's like there's so much more out there than any 18-year-old is aware of. And that's actually something that my wife and I have been really trying to do with our kids, is that from very early ages, we've looked at like, what are you good at? Where are your passions? Okay. And let's, make sure that you're aware. And the world now is a lot more, I think, open to a little alternative paths and not just the traditional professions, which is great. And so my kids are coming, I mean, at their ages of 15 and 12, they know so much more about what is possible as far as what they can do, whether or not they go to college, whether or not they take, the higher educational road or a different road. Like there are lots of options to them. For me, there weren't. I mean, growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was a much more traditional sort of rigid way of seeing the world. Everybody who was smart went to college. You had to make a decision about what you were going to do with your life. If you were smart enough, you could go into a profession where you could have a really good living. And so, it was obvious. It was like, I'll do engineering. I mean, everybody in my world was encouraging me in that direction all at the same time. And then, like I said, within 2 years of being actually at Cal Poly doing engineering with my engineering buddies, they were all like, why are you here? And then when I said I'm going to law school, they all cheered. They're like, obviously,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
isn't that amazing? And within 2 years, like all the people in my life went from telling me I should be an engineer to telling me I should be a lawyer. I think that people 2 years on, and including myself 2 years on, knew me a little bit better. But again,
So
what do you know when you're 18? It's an odd thing that we funnel kids into a system that encourages them to make life decisions at the age of 18. I'm
it's
really
crazy
trying
to
to,
me.
isn't
Yeah,
that?
let
Yeah.
let me interrupt you there because I was the same way. I had no idea. I mean, a little different. Like I liked Atticus Finch, and so by the way, I'm the first one in my family to go to college. So you had a little bit
Wow. Yeah.
of benefit that I didn't have. My
Yeah.
parents were just awesome people, but just weren't educated, and so Atticus Finch, loved him. That was my idea, lawyer or Perry Mason. And I'm not talking the new HBO. Obviously, this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
years, the old one.
Yes. The black and white. That's
Oh,
right.
and he's at the, he would pull the rabbit out of the hat on the stand at the end,
Yes.
every episode,
Yep.
But it's hard, right? I mean, our parents, all this, you have expectations. I don't blame them at all. Just
No, not at
your
all.
parents, they tried to do their best and funnel you toward where they thought you'd be successful. But so my son is an interdisciplinary studies major, and people, a lot of people laugh, particularly old people, but that's like, I'm glad he chose that. He's a writer and he loves music and he loves philosophy and he loves education, a lot like you. And so he's fascinated with these worlds. So he got to design his own program and kind of, he has an advisor and he had to design the classes, explain how they connect to each other and all that stuff. And I think it's good because, by the way, I mean, when I went to school, there was none of these jobs. Social media director, or, there
So
was
true.
baby programming in 1985. I mean, I took Basic and Pascal, and there was I can't remember what the new one was then, but everything was in its infancy. There was no internet.
Yes.
At all. So like half the worlds that exist today didn't exist. So how would the kids possibly know? So we need to educate people on what does it mean to be human?
Yes.
How do you feel, how do you feel about things? A lot of Christians never get asked in fundamentalism as they're growing up as kids, how they feel.
Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't matter how you feel. It's just do what Jesus says.
Right.
And so, but how we feel is part of who we are as humans and what we enjoy and what we don't enjoy. And anyways, I think college should be an time of exploration. And
Absolutely.
then you want to specialize. Okay. Some people know if you want to be an accountant, have at it. If you know that's what you like, I'm sorry. I love my accountant, but that bored me to death. But most people don't know what they want. Even being doctors, like so many of my friends, they started out pre-med or pre-law, and then they ended up being architects or, who knows what you become. But it should be a time of exploration. I think we just need to set kids free. And of course, not everybody needs to go to college.
Right.
And so we need some kind of process that's better at sorting and getting kids opportunities to do what it is they love and will benefit the world, but maybe isn't linked to university and 100,000 in student debt, which is
I know it's crazy. Yeah, and that's a whole other field of conversation that we can spend the rest of the day on. But to answer the second part of your question, so law school, I land in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is, again, Carlsbad to San Luis Obispo to Charlottesville, Virginia, which is another utterly quaint, gorgeous little college town. Sadly, we got a black eye in 2017 with the race riots here, which put us on the map in all the wrong ways. But Charlottesville is a really beautiful town. And I remember coming and experiencing fall for the first time, all the leaves in the mountains, and you talk about beauty and as one of those kind of ethereal other experiences in the world that gestures toward something beyond, toward a higher purpose. I mean, I remember thinking, like, when I watched the forest turn for the very first time, I'd never experienced it, I guess, when I was younger in Indianapolis, but I don't remember. I was too young. Yeah. So when I remember seeing the forest aflame and all the colors, I remember thinking to myself, and this is my scientific brain operating, I was like, what is the point of that? Like, that is a totally gratuitous display of absolutely mind-altering beauty.
Yeah.
And that the mere fact of its existence, like, there is no reason that the trees need to look that way for their own existence. They do it. Why? Well, that's a good question. We don't know. And yet they do. And we get to experience it every autumn. And I am still like, I'm kind of the weather vane. I'm always looking for beauty. My eye is always wandering. My kids are like, now I see a sunset and driving down the road, and the sun is setting, and I'll see the clouds in a certain way. And I'm like, kids, look at the clouds. Aren't those like, that is an amazing sky. And they just roll their eyes. They're teenagers. They're like, Dad, come on. What? We're listening to our music. I'm like, you can't miss that. Like, That's
Yeah.
glory. So I experienced that in the autumn forests, and I found very much a home in the rigors of studying the law and thinking about the law and reading about the law. At the same time, in a weird way, the very same season, I had started working on a novel that I never finished, thank God, because it was terrible. I could use a stronger word, but this is a public podcast. It was bad. But I loved the experience of starting to tell a story. And this was in my senior year of college. So I gave up on that, came out to law school. But then I had the very first semester of law school, which is not a time for the faint-hearted. I mean, I was very busy and I was reading a lot, and it was all stretching me in different ways. I had an idea for the first novel that I wrote. And so I sat there in the courtyard at UVA Law School and started writing a novel. And this is in the fall of my 1L year. Not a great time to start a book. And what I found was that I would do my reading for the law, and then I would come home and write. And I did this through most of that year. My grades slipped. It's funny, once I met my wife, then my girlfriend, like, she looked at me in the way that a good woman will, and just said, "What's wrong with you? You're paying all this money to go to law school, and you're not spending as much time studying as you are writing a novel that you have no idea what will ever become of it." And in the end, nothing became of it. It went into a drawer again, thank God, because it didn't deserve to be published. So I was really on two tracks. Like, on the one hand, I was pursuing the law, loved it, really enjoyed it. At the same time, I had this thing in me where I wanted to tell stories, and I had an idea for a story that, to this day, I actually went back and completely rewrote that story years later, set it in a different time, different characters, and yet, some similar themes. And, to this day, that book is something that I will eventually give to my kids and say, this could have been published. It was publishable, but it was so different from anything I've ever written since then that it never should be published. So it really is something that I can just leave behind as an artifact for those of you who might be interested in my thinking about the world and faith and all of that, because that's really what it's about. So I was doing the two things together. So that first book, I finished my 1L year and started dating my wife that year. That was a heady year. And then
Is she a lawyer? Was she in law school with you?
No. She was actually grad school for education. So she ended up being a teacher.
Great.
So yeah, but we went to the same church and met actually because we were both serving as helping out with the youth group. We were young adult leaders in the high school youth group at the church. And so we met that way. And then I basically set that book aside, started working on another book my third year, kept my grades up. I got married between my second and third years. And my wife basically said, "Corbin, if I'm totally blessed writing another book. I know that's in you, but you've got to do it on your own time and make sure you keep your grades up." So my third year, I kept my grades up and wrote another book that also went into the, dustbin of history. I mean, just went into a drawer to collect digital dust. What I found is that as I was able to complete stories, I was able to share them with some people and got rejected from agents at that point. But I got enough positive feedback. I often, when I talk to young people and people ask me, like, how do you find the thing that you're best at? How do you find, what do you want to do with your life, especially college students or whatever? I mean, or even high school students. I tell them, like, you will, generally speaking, if you are attentive, by the time you are in your 20s, you will have heard people in your life affirm the things that are the gifts that you carry in the world. Like, you will have heard people say that, I see this light in you. I see this strength in you. I see this talent in you. I see this beauty in you. And if you're attentive and if you listen, like, those actually can be really useful, directional, sort of pointing you in a certain kind of direction toward what you should end up doing with your life. It's not always true that you can do the thing you're most talented at and make a living at it. A lot of the world is not that way. And yet at the same time, if you're attentive to those areas where people have affirmed you, very often you can find a way to make a good living that is consonant with those gifts that you have. And so I was affirmed a lot through my young adult life as a writer, in everything from the notes that I took in law school. I remember one guy, I shared my notes with him, and he stopped me on the outside walkway as we were walking into class. And he was like, "Corbin, these are the best notes I've ever seen." And he's like, "You should be a writer." I mean, I remember that to this day, right? Because people have
That's
affirmed that,
fascinating.
right? So
Yeah.
people affirmed that in me for many years before I ever recognized, oh, I think I could do this professionally. I think I could write a book. So I was writing books that ultimately went nowhere. But with each attempt, and I wrote three that ultimately were never published. The third one being the rewrite of the first one. I just discovered this love of storytelling and also a real knack for it. By the third book, I was actually able to get an author. I was finally able to get some author to read it. He was somebody, a dear person who's written, a number of novels but not a big bestseller. But he read the book and he actually really affirmed it. And I remember getting his email and just it felt like for the very first time, somebody who actually knew what they were talking about, who wasn't friend to family member. I mean, somebody in that world affirmed my talent. And
Right.
it was right after that. I mean, really, like within months after that my wife had the idea for A Walk Across the Sun. And then that idea, which came to her in just really almost full flesh, it was a wild thing. And she's never had an idea like that before or since. And I remember her giving it to me and just saying, Corbin, I really think you need to write a novel about human trafficking. And, and she even said it, you need to set it in India. I mean, of all places. And she said, I think you need to do it now, because by that point we had a baby in the house. And she said, if you don't do it now, you'll never do it. And I know you, if you don't do it, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. I had been talking for a little while about maybe writing a justice story, but I never knew exactly what that might mean. So yeah, it was Marcy who gave me the idea. She often, given how challenging the road has been over the course of the years, she's often looked back and thought, maybe I was the fool. I mean, I should have told him to stay in the law, and at least it would have been a much more comprehensible, stable life, probably a better living. But it's funny because it was Marcy who had that idea. And
Well, I'm glad she did. Let me
Yeah.
just say, everybody should read A Walk Across the Sun. It's so number one, it's entertaining as heck. You're a really really great writer, Corbin, and I know tons of people tell you that, but you are. It's so enjoyable to read. It's very enjoyable. But number two, oh my God, I had no idea that was going on in our world, and I have to tell you, I purposely have not clicked on the headlines on stories about that because of the context. It seems that a bunch of Christians jumped on the bandwagon recently
Yes.
in light of Black Lives Matter and all this, and it suddenly became, human trafficking. Well,
Yeah.
your book's been around a long time before that. You saw this problem and put it out there in a way that is, I mean, I was stunned. In fact, I've been asked to be on a board of a group in Dallas repeatedly that's involved in human trafficking. I've repeatedly pushed off my friend, two friends that have asked me about it. And so I saw him at the Dallas Mavericks game the other night and went up to him after reading your book, Walk Across the Sun. And I was like, I had no idea. And I just read this, and I told them, and of course, they've all read it. But but anyways, I'm late jumping on it. So I love it because you've said in the past that you wanted to explore the truth, and then you wanted to look at human rights and such. And boy, you did it in that book in a magnificent way. And I've not read your other three works of fiction, but let's talk a little bit about Walk Across the Sun. Because your wife had the idea, Marcy had the idea, you're in practice, you're an associate at a top law firm. Walk us through that and that book getting published, and then I want to talk about Wastelands after that.
Yeah, sure. So I graduated from law school, did a federal clerkship, stayed in town. I mean, I was one of these people who I really always been about quality of life. I've never really been motivated by money. I'm really much more motivated by, I just would like to have enough to enjoy my life, but I really like the quality of my life matters profoundly. So I made those early decisions. I was like, I'd really like to stay in Charlottesville if that's possible, not go off and do the big law thing where I'm chained to the billable hour for a number of years, living basically on ramen noodles in somebody's back office, billing 2,000 hours a year, making really good money, but having absolutely no life. I didn't want to do that. So,
Corbin, you just described for our listeners my life.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be.
That's all right. That's all right. No, you're not at all. Listen, we know it's not 2,000 though. It's more like 2,500 to 3,000. But I appreciate the 2,000.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So sorry to interrupt.
No, you're right. You're right. Exactly. So no, I didn't want to do that. I think more than anything, I didn't want to do that because I really wanted to write. And I always had this dream of writing a book and it being a big bestseller. I mean, every writer has that dream. I was just foolish, arrogant and foolish enough to think that I was going to do that right off the bat. Obviously that didn't happen, but with the books that never got published. With The Walk Across the Sun, it felt special from the beginning. I mean, just because its origin story was so unusual, and then as soon as I was like, "That's a brilliant idea, Marcy. I will try." I mean, I don't know how to do this because if I'm going to write a credible story about international sex trafficking and modern day slavery, that's going to require me to actually go and research and learn. It's going to require me to meet people that I don't know, ask for favors that they have no reason to give me. I'm going to need to get in with experts. I'm going to need to actually spend time on the ground. And if you want, you're telling me India, and I knew by then because we had actually watched this film and it had opened our eyes. And then we'd done some research and I knew that India had a massive, massive human trafficking problem, both in sex, the sex trade, but also in forced labor. I was like, if I'm going to need to go there. I've never been there. I don't know anyone there. That's going to be really expensive. We have no money. We have a baby in the house. We're living in a small apartment. We have a mountain of student debt. Like, I'm trying to build a law practice at this point. I moved out of, from the clerkship. I went on and got a litigation job with a law firm here in Charlottesville, but this is a small town. So while we did really good work, the billable rates were not that high, and associates in town were not paid exceptionally well. And so we were just making it, right? I mean, I was not socking away a bunch of money. I mean, we had virtually no savings. I don't come from a family of money, neither does Marcy. And so the idea of taking a sabbatical from the firm, it would require weeks away on the far side of the world, and then going to the far side of the world and spending time. Like the dollar signs. I'm just smart enough to recognize. Yeah.
Let me stop you. As a law partner and a dad, that's insane. Right. So you have like the dream job. You clerked, by the way, who'd you clerk for?
Yeah. So I clerked for a federal magistrate judge here in Charlottesville.
Awesome.
Judge Brickler. Yeah.
Awesome. So you clerked. And then I clerked on the Fifth Circuit. It's an amazing year. I hope
much higher. Yeah, you're in Court of Appeals.
Well, yeah, but and my judge Edith Jones. I mean, she was phenomenal. She's controversial in some areas, but she's an amazing human being who taught me a lot about writing and thinking. And my co-clerks are great. It was an awesome experience. But you clerked. You're now at a really good law firm. You're working your way toward partnership. You're a shoe-in because of who you are and how bright you are and everything. And you're going to trade all that in to become a published author, which it's impossible. I mean, it's almost impossible. It's like joining the NBA, right? I mean, I'm going to be the next Grisham, right? It's not going to happen. Yeah. But your wife has this idea for a book, fiction. You're going to do it in fiction. And okay, so walk us through this because you do it, which is crazy, and I love that you did it. And thank God you did it.
Well, no,
wow.
I mean, look,
how do you do that?
So part of my faith journey has been trying to very early on. This is not something that came from my background at all. It was something that I discovered, but I've always believed that we're all, each of us has a set of gifts, that we're on the earth for a reason, and that a truly well-lived life is one in which we live out of our giftings. So it may be, like I mentioned, that that we're living out of different giftings. One gifting leads us to a particular kind of job that pays the bills. But if we're really living out of our giftings, then we're living a well-lived life. And so I knew I had this gift for writing, and I always felt this sort of deep, undefinable kind of, not always, but by my late teens, especially my 20s, felt this sense of call toward the written word. But again, I had no idea if I would ever manage to write something people would want to read. My early attempts fell flat. But again, I'm not someone who gives up. I mean, especially not, I know I have a talent. And when people have affirmed me, I know that like, it's like, okay, I'll keep doing the hard thing. I'm bullheaded that way. I'm very stubborn. I'm not going to give up. So when Marcy gave me that idea, I thought, this is brilliant. This is a step in a different direction. It might be the right direction. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to start talking to people and seeing if doors open. Because for me, the way I've lived my life, I've really always, and again, this comes back to, the way I see the world through a frame of faith and through a God who invites us into his story. It's like he's telling a story in my life. He's telling a story in your life and my wife's life and every person's life. I want to find my way into the narrative. I want to understand who I am as a player in a larger story. So I just was like, I will follow and I will continue to walk forward, even if it's crazy, if doors open. Like I will knock on doors. I will tell people about what I'm thinking. I will start asking around and say, hey, I've got this crazy idea for a novel about human trafficking that I think could really open people's eyes at the time. And this is, 2008. At the time, there were a lot of films and also some fictional books that were taking on big issues and doing really well. And so social issues. And so I thought that was the frame that I'll use. I don't know how to be a journalist. I've never done research overseas, but hey, I've done a lot of like very complex litigation. So I know how to do research. Like I'm not afraid of becoming a subject matter expert about something that at the beginning I know nothing about. I'm a curious person. I've also traveled by that point, I'd traveled a fair amount, always in the developed world, but I'd been to Europe a number of times. I'd been to New Zealand. I mean, I'd done a fair amount of travel. So I was, and I'd done a shipboard journey around the South Pacific. I mean, and Greece. I mean, I'd gotten comfortable in the world. And so my sense was, okay, well, the developing world, India is a very different world. But again, if I start asking, if I open my mouth, and if I just start casting this vision, and if people come around me and support me and say, yeah, let me help you. Yeah, I've got connections here. I've got connections here. Yeah, that sounds like something you should do, then I'm just going to follow that. Like I'm going to be willing to say, actually, the universe is speaking to me here. Like I'm actually doing something in line with my story. Like this is what I was meant for. And so I just opened myself to that. And what was really beautiful is that year was an absolutely remarkable year because time after time after time, I would randomly bump into somebody or talk to somebody and say, hey, look, I've got this crazy idea. And they'd be like, oh, that's not a crazy idea. Let me help you. Or I know somebody in India. Oh, wait, you're thinking about, I had this idea of setting the early part of the book, basing it on the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004, which devastated the eastern coast of India and Tamil Nadu. I was like, that's where I'm going to start it because, we know that trafficking comes from vulnerability and natural disasters create vulnerability. That's a really dramatic way to open the book. But I'm going to need to go to East India. I'm going to need to actually meet somebody who was affected by the tsunami in East India. And I was like, how the heck am I going to do that? Like, I don't know anybody. And then it turns out a friend was just like, actually, I know this guy who, does work. He's an American, but does work in Chennai in Tamil Nadu. And he's got connections there. And so I'm going to pitch him on this. And that guy then reached out to me and we had a telephone call and he's like, oh yeah, I know I've actually met a young lady in Chennai who was swept away by the tsunami and she survived. And actually her family, all of them were swept into the waters, but they survived. And he was like, I can put you in touch with them. And I was just like, I mean, my head's exploding. I'm like, I'm sitting in Charlottesville. How is that possible? That's nuts. And then I was like, I need some organization who does work on anti-trafficking to help me. And so I knew about the International Justice Mission because we'd actually doing the little research that we'd done after the film we saw had come across them. And so we'd thrown a few dollars their way. But, they're basically a big law firm that happens to be a nonprofit and they're very high level, A-class, like not the sort of group that's going to let little old me in the door. And so but again, I just started, talking to friends and a friend of mine was like, well, actually, I know a guy around town who is a big donor at IJM. Let me see what I can do. And that guy turns out is close friends with Gary Haugen, the founder of IJM. And, took a while for this guy to pay attention to me, but eventually he sends an email to Haugen's secretary. A couple months later, it took a while, but like she got back and said, oh, let me see what I can do. And everything started moving. And suddenly their director of communications reaches out to me in October. This is took some waiting. And I've learned that in this journey, there's a lot of waiting as you just kind of wait for stuff to happen. But I waited and then everything moved. And this person said, come up to DC and sit down, with me over lunch and tell me what you want. And I sat down for lunch with the director of communications for IJM, and this is October 2008. And she's an executive. I mean, like the way that they operate, they're like a big law firm. They've got a ton of lawyers, they've got a ton of staff, they got a big office, big budget. Like she's both very the kind of person it was almost like a job interview. Like, she was very matter of fact, but also I could tell that she had an open heart. She was like, what is it that you like? Why are you here? And I said, well, I have this desire to write a novel about human trafficking, and I don't have a publisher. I don't have a literary agent. I'm going to be candid with you. Like, what I have is I've written a couple of books that have never been published. I'm a lawyer, UVA, small town practice, but I actually believe I'm supposed to do this. And so I'm just wondering if you would open the door and basically embed me like a journalist in your Mumbai operation, and basically, give me the keys to the kingdom. I mean, I was that frank with her. I mean, it just was like, if it was like Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. I mean, that was always my philosophy. Like, I'm just going to be frank with people, and they can slam the door in my face if they want. I'll be kind, but you never know. And she just looked at me, and I'll never forget this. And she was like, Corbin, I really do not know why I am saying this to you, but I actually think you could do this. And so I'm going to reach out to our field people and see what I can do. Let me get back to you. And so, yeah, like within a couple of weeks, I hear, oh, the field people are open to this. We need to do some fiddling with the schedule. When do you want to go over there? And I'm just like, all this stuff is happening together. I'm trying to figure out how all the pieces are going to work. It all comes together in the most bizarre way. I mean, literally, I've kept a record of all this stuff, and it really blows my mind. I mean, to this day, like it is hard to
Corbin,
believe.
Can I interrupt you a minute?
Yeah.
I need to take a break. Yeah. So we were talking, you were walking us through a walk across the sun and the development of it. It's such an amazing story. So you had a little baby. You guys already had one. You had your first son.
Yeah. He
Right
was
now?
born in the summer of 2007. So all this stuff was, the idea that came to Marcy in the summer of 2008. So he was about a year old,
Yeah.
almost a year old. So yeah, when I boarded the flight to Mumbai, I left out of Richmond, and Marcy and Samuel came to see me off. And it was just, truly, it's like one of those wild experiences where at that point I'm 29 years old. And so I was about to turn 30. 29, had a baby. My young wife is sending me off to the far side of the world, to a place I've never been before, to meet with people I who have promised to help me, but none of whom I know. It was basically 5.5 weeks. I was going to be gone a long time. Partners had kindly given me an unpaid sabbatical from the firm, but the only way that I could do this is, I actually had to raise support. Basically, I had to reach out to friends and family. We spent every last dime in our savings account on this, and yet I didn't have nearly enough to pay for a trip like this. And so, thankfully, and it was really wild. Even down to the last money that I needed came in like a week before I left. And then I got on the plane and went, and my heart was like, I had an idea of what I wanted to the kind of story I wanted to tell. And I had charted out the trip to kind of follow the course of the story that was in my head. But I also knew that a lot of that would change once I was on the ground. And so really I was going to drink through the fire hose. I needed to be a human sponge. I needed to, by that point in my life, I had learned that I needed to say yes to everything that came my way, unless it appeared, even if it appeared, dangerous, so long as it wasn't immoral, I needed to say yes, and just trust that, again, sort of that sense of like being in my own story, like trust that if these doors open, there's a reason for that. And I'm going to walk through them. I don't know what's on the other end. I don't know what's on the other side. I don't know who I'm going to meet. I don't know, how all this is going to unfold. I've never done it before, but I'm just going to trust, in Providence. And so that's what I did. For all those weeks, every day was an incredibly dense experience. I embedded with IJM. After I wrote the book, it's funny, the number of people at IJM at high levels, including Gary Haugen, who told me, later on, we've never done this with anyone else, and we do not understand why we said yes to you, but we're really glad we did. I mean, it was just completely bizarre, like the access they gave me to everyone. And really, I just came with this open heart, like, teach me, I want to learn. I'm smart. I can learn. Show me better than telling me. Show me, take me wherever you want to take me. Show me what it's like on the ground. Let me, go into the brothels undercover. I mean, let me, meet some of the victims survivors that have been rescued. Let me talk to your investigators about what it's like on the ground doing undercover work. Show me. I remember when I was in East India, and I met the girl who was swept away by the waves. And I've had these experiences now so many times in the world, and every one of them is this profound human moment. But like where you connect with the story of somebody who's experienced something and who really needs you to ask them to tell their story because they need to be healed by telling their story. I mean, there's something so profoundly healing about telling your story, especially stories of trauma, to someone who can receive it and receive it with love and not judgment. And that I remember walking with her after she told me the story. And I said, would you show me the beach? And she looked at me, she gave me this dead-eyed stare. I mean, we'd been talking for hours, and she told me, about her family. And she said, I haven't been back there in all these years. And I said, all right, well, I mean, can you at least tell me where it is? And she stopped and she was like, no, I need to go. I'll take you. And so we walked that stretch of beach where she was nearly killed by the waves. And it was a profound human moment where she invited me into her story. And I knew, like, it was in moments like that where I just was like, I am in touch with who I am, who I was meant to be. Like, this is what I was made for. And this is the thing that I've been looking for. Like, this is me, this is why I came. I mean, I in doing that, and I had experiences like that across India, and then I went to Europe and came back. And then it was on my birthday, my 30th birthday, I was working at the law school because, we lived in at that point, we lived in a small apartment. And so, my happy place was to go back to UVA Law School up the road and, work in the law library. And so I'd been doing additional research after coming back. And I'd just been thinking, like, I was terrified of this. Like, when am I going to start writing? Like, and I kept pushing it off. I kept saying, no, I needed to do more research. But then I will never forget the day. It was an evening because I was working, obviously, in the law. I was working in the law during the day. Was going to law school in the evenings, doing research, leaving my sweet wife and kid home. It's just like she did so much single momming during that time. And but I just had these words came to me, and I was like, all right, I've got to start writing. And so I wrote the first scene. I read that scene for the first time in many years just yesterday because I actually was talking to somebody else about the book. And I still remember writing those words, and I still remember the feeling of this is special. Like, this is different from the other stuff I've done. There's purpose here. There's intention. There's something fundamentally right about this, and it's right for me to be doing it. And so just continued in faith, laying down words on the page, believing that, somebody would want to read them at some point. I should add one dimension here, which is that before I left for India, I had been fortunate to meet John Grisham. He lives here in town, and a friend had told me, and of course, he's one of the best-selling writers of all time and a lawyer. And I read many of his books, but I also knew that he was very difficult to reach. I mean, like many celebrities, he's just not somebody you can't just get in with him. He's got a lot of walls and a lot of protection around him. And so I had a friend tell me, you've got to tell John Grisham about this because I think it'd be right up his alley. And I was like, yeah, great. Do you have a connection to him? Because I don't. Like, I don't know he lives in town. Yeah, but I'm not going to stop him on the downtown mall. Like, he wouldn't give me the time of day. Again, it was just one of these serendipity things. I had coffee with a friend shortly thereafter, and it's funny because this friend knew what I was doing and he'd never had the thought, but he said, actually, my wife worked with a guy who knows John really well, and I'm pretty sure that John owes him a favor. Let me see what I can do. It was one of the let me see what I can do moments. And, he comes back and he's like, yeah, John's friend will meet you and read your book. I was like, why? Well, he's retired now and he's wealthy and he has time. And so he liked the idea and loves my wife. And, that's what my friend said. And so I was like, great. So I met this guy, gave him a copy of the book in manuscript form. He read it, loved it, raved about it, said this is going to be, a fantastic, this is going to be a big book. And by the way, I'm going to see John at his Christmas party in just a couple of days. Let me talk to him about it. And so he talks to John about it. Turns out John cares about the issue, knows about it, and agrees to a coffee with me. So like 3 or 4 weeks before I left for India, I sat down for coffee with John Grisham in Charlottesville. And, he was appropriately wary, as I would be in his shoes, of some, young lawyer showing up and with this big vision and big dream and having not written a single word, having not gone to the place, whatever. He's told this story in public numerous times, so I don't have any problem telling it. But like, he loves to tell it because it's like, he truly thought that he would never hear from me again. He was like, yeah, I'm doing a favor for a friend that I've got to do because I owe this guy, a favor. And here's this young person who, claims he wants to be a writer. He's a lawyer. Yeah, right. Okay. I've met a few of those. This guy is going to go away and don't even know he'll get to India, let alone write a book, let alone write something worthy of anything. But he did, because John is an incredibly kind and stand-up guy. He did at the end of the meeting before we left. He said, look, if you actually get the book to me, if you write it, I'll take a look at it. And if I like it, then I'll share it with my people in New York. And so when I sat down to write the first word and all the way through to the last word, my whole goal was, can I write a book that John Grisham is going to love? Because I was convinced that if I did, that would be, it'd be the moonshot. I was wrong about that, but I was right about the motivation. So, in the end, I was very fortunate. I finished the book, gave it to his, John's friend after a bunch of people read it. I did a bunch of edits myself. And then I went into this 4.5 month, felt like 4.5 years waiting period where I knew that John had the book, but I didn't know if he would ever read it, if he had read it and hated it, if he would get around to it in a year or two. I mean, I was waiting on nothing because I had no promises from him other than that one coffee a year before, no emails from him, nothing. And I was in, I love to tell this story to lawyers because I was in a CLE in April of 2010. It was an ethics CLE, and you know how they go. Like, I was asleep at my table. Like I was zoning. I was just like, when is the next break? I'm sorry. Some lawyers are really good presenters. Most aren't. And unfortunately, CLEs, I found occasionally they're interesting. Most of the time they were terrible. So this was not a good one. But I had to do it for the ethics points for the year. And I take a break and I walk outside of the hotel and I had one of those wannabe BlackBerries. This was in the days before, didn't have an iPhone. I had my first sort of cell phone, and it wasn't even a BlackBerry. It was one of these wannabe BlackBerries with the tiny little keys that you tried to press with your thumbs. I don't know how we did that back in the day. And I got this email from Grisham, and I nearly fell over because he was just like, he said, I just finished your book. It's one of the best things I've read in a long time. Can I help you? And I was just like, of course. So, I'm calling my wife, to share the story, and she nearly falls off her chair, and it was a beautiful moment. And ultimately, what came of that is he wasn't able to just snap his fingers and get a book deal for me. But what he was able to do is he was able to give me some really beautiful words that helped get me in the door, past the gatekeepers, and get the book in the right hands. And ultimately the day that, and it was actually Valentine's Day, 2011, when my agent came to me with the deal that allowed me to leave the practice of law and write a second book. I knew how crazy it was. I remember my wife saying, do you know how much money you'd have to make for, to leave the practice of law, even though you're in a small law practice? Like, we have a baby, we're going to have another kid. Like that. And I kept telling her, I was like, I think I'm supposed to write for a living. And she kept saying, Corbin, do you understand what you're saying? And I said, yes, I'm not foolish. Like, I recognize I'm dreaming here. I've always been a dreamer, but like, I can also put two and two together and say, yes, I know how much the deal would have to be and how rare that kind of deal is. And my agent came to me with this 2-book offer, and it wasn't, $1 million, but what it was it was enough for me to say, wow, okay, I think I can buy myself a couple of years of a runway, and I can write another book, and I can see if this works. And it turned into that deal turned into multiple deals with all over the world and foreign languages. And back in the way that in 2012 that could happen, these days publishing is very different, but
It changed.
it was a beautiful moment. And it really was an affirmation of, the dream also the calling, the sense that this is what I was made for, that that glimmer that I had in India and that I had through the writing. Yeah, so that's a long way of telling the story. I don't think I've ever really told. You've asked good questions. I don't think I've ever really told the story quite that extensively before. I'm hopeful your listeners are not bored.
Well, they will absolutely not be bored. What a fascinating story. Some would call it luck. Some would call it God. Some would say it was your incredible perseverance. But the doors opened. You continued to push through. I mean, it's pretty remarkable, Corbin. But I have to say, I was taught very early on in my faith walk that a man's gift makes room for him, or a person's gift makes room for him. And in this case, I just think that's a reality. I mean, the universe, you are an incredible storyteller. And so, people started identifying that very early on in school. Some of your teachers you told us about,
Yep.
and then at Pauley, people saw this guy who's got this brilliant mathematical and scientific mind, also has this heart and this gift of writing. And so then, then here these students around you, and you know how it is. I mean, the 18, 19, 20-year-olds, and they're watching and they see, wow, yeah, that makes sense. Law school, that type of thing makes sense. And then you get into law school and you have this dream, and your wife gives you this idea. It must have been push and pull for her, right? Because she has
It was.
this guy who has a great career to raise kids and raise a family. But on the other hand, she sees this incredible gift and gives you ideas and spurs you on. So, and through all that, I mean, Grisham, how the hell does that guy show up? I don't know, but he does in your life.
Yes.
It's so beautiful. But again, your talent, that A Walk Across the Sun, I encourage everybody to read that. I can't believe they didn't make a movie of it. I cried several times during it. And I thought, I can't believe they didn't make a movie of this. So
Yeah, there's a reason, and actually,
I'm
I'm
sure.
glad you brought that up
Yeah.
because so there were a number of people who said the very same thing. I mean, it wasn't long after that first deal when I was having a talk with a big Hollywood agent, and she said, the challenge right now is that Taken just came out a year and a half ago, and I'd actually seen it, and while Taken was it was fun to watch, it was also highly inaccurate. And it was frustrating because I was like, I'm telling this story that's really deeply authentic and deeply researched. And then there's Liam Neeson doing the James Bond thing with human trafficking. And I was just like, that's not the way it is. And yet it was a big Hollywood movie. So, and so basically this agent just said, look, I love your book. I love the story. It's just not the right time. Maybe it will be in a few years. And the challenge was by then Hollywood had moved on. So, and there were others that had done films on it. So yeah, it's sadly, I mean, I think it would have made a fantastic film, but likely never will. Now, Wastelands, on the other hand,
that's let's pivot.
Yeah.
Let's pivot because
Yeah.
you obviously wrote 3 more fiction books that were successful, but then you take these turns in your life that could be head shaking at the time, but then you do it and it works out very well. So you decide, well, let me write a nonfiction book. Apparently, some people encouraged you to do it, and let me start with these words: "Quote, beautifully written, impeccably researched, and told with the air of suspense that few writers can handle. Wastelands is a story I wish I had written." End quote. That's John Grisham, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's pretty remarkable. John Grisham wrote that about Wastelands. So I knew you had pivoted before I read any of your books. I knew the story from Christine. And so I started with your first book because that's which way you got to do it. And then I jumped to Wastelands and I thought, man, how is he going to do this? Because he told this great fictional story. It was just, it's fantastic. How is he going to do this? And you did it, dude. You took this, what I consider it could be very dry material. I mean, I do this for a living. What you did is it's so remarkable because your mind, I can tell the way you would have put a case together. It's just brilliant. And then you take these characters, and that's what it is. I mean, writing the story is like, how do you tell these stories through these characters? And you had some incredible characters. As a matter of full disclosure, I represent dairy farmers and potato farmers as a part of my practice, so I'm well acquainted with CAFOs in the dairy industry, but also know about hogs as well. So I know the issues, I know the problems. Let's talk. We don't have much time left, but let's talk about it. I want you to talk about Wastelands. You tell me, but again, I'm searching for the ethics in it. It's a beautifully well-written story. I'm sure it's going to get turned into a movie. It better. But again, you take these worlds and you uncover them and show us that we need to be alarmed by it in an entertaining way. And then I want to talk about your book. Tell us about that. And then what's next as far as your book, because it seems like a lot with the hog industry is just going about business as usual. Your floor.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So, in 2019, I mean, again, this is just the way that I live and move through the world. I'm sort of, I try to keep an open mind and an open heart to what comes to me. And so, in 2019, a friend, January 2019, a friend called me up, and just somebody I trust called me up, a fellow writer, not Grisham, but somebody that lives in Charlottesville, who's a dear friend of mine, called me up and said, "Hey, look, I think I've got your next book." And it was, when he said that, I was in the middle of working on another project, and she's like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, just listen to me." So I know this woman. She's this fantastic litigator from North Carolina, comes from my small town, the same small town he grew up in. Mona Lisa Wallace comes from in Salisbury, North Carolina, in the Piedmont outside of Charlotte. He's like, she's a good friend of my mother's. I've been hearing about this case that she's been working on for years now. It's against the hog industry. And you just would not believe the conditions on these hog farms. And I'm like, his name's John Hart. I said, "John, what, hog farms?" Like, I mean, and he's like, "Yeah, but just listen. Let me tell you about it." So he starts telling me about the way that, bacon is made, or at least a lot of America's bacon. And frankly, a lot of the world's pork is made, where these giant animals, I mean, they grow to 300 pounds in market weight, are crammed into these sheds, 1,000 apiece. When they never see the ground, they never see the sunlight. They grow to their market weight, live in these cramped containers, fed a really high nutrient antibiotic diet in order to fatten them faster. And then they're shipped out to the slaughterhouse. And yet in between, for the 5 months they're there, they're growing, they're producing 5 times the waste of a human being. Every single pig produces a 5x multiplier over a human being. And if you've got a hog farm with 10,000 animals, then you're talking about a city of 50,000 people. And what do you do with all that waste? I mean, in a city, you treat it, you manage. There are civilized ways of dealing with that. We deal with our waste. Hog industry in the 60s came up with a much cheaper alternative, which has been around since medieval times, frankly, been around forever, which is dig a big hole in the dirt and create a cesspool. And then,
Lagoon.
when the
we like to call them lagoons.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, I know. It's a beauty, right? It's like the Bermuda Lagoon. Yeah, right. They do call lagoons. So, but of course, it's a cesspool. And then they, the idea was, okay, we'll take, once the level reaches the berm, obviously we can't have spillage, because then it goes into the rivers and streams and it pollutes the groundwater. We have to spray it out onto fields. And so they repurposed a lot of the farmland around as spray fields and created these giant sort of Jurassic-sized spray guns that would pump hundreds of gallons a minute up into the atmosphere and out onto the field. The idea was, well, waste is a fertilizer. It wasn't a totally harebrained notion at the beginning. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, nobody's really thinking about the environmental repercussions of that. And certainly in Eastern North Carolina, no white farmer is thinking about the small neighborhood of ancestral Black people who've been living there for the last 150 years next door. I mean, nobody's thinking about the consequences for them. Unfortunately, there are a lot of those communities in Eastern North Carolina where you have mostly Black people of modest means, not exclusively. There are some white people who live in these neighborhoods. They've changed through the years, but a lot of them are very tight-knit. These are family members. These are extended family members. These are cousins. These are kids, stepkids. People come back because this is the way that they're raised. They're raised on these rural plots of land. In some cases, their ancestors, their grandparents were enslaved and then emancipated on this very dirt. And they then were able to acquire the land during the 1870s, 80s, 90s, during Reconstruction, and hold on to it through many years of racist attempts to take it from them. And then they passed it to their kids, their grandkids. And so for these people living next door to these hog farms, and they'd been living there a long time, like, this is their castle. This is their world. I mean, this is their ancestral land, the only valuable thing they have to give to their kids. They live an outdoor life because they don't have big homes. They're very small. Don't have air conditioning. I mean, Eastern North Carolina is very hot in the summertime and actually a lot of the time. Imagine living with no air conditioning. So where are you going to live? You're going to live on your porch. You're going to live in your yard. And unfortunately, these spray fields, these lagoons, these open air pits created the conditions that made it, in many cases, it was episodic depending on the weather, but unbearable to be outside. In fact, unbearable to be inside. There are many stories that I gathered of people who talked about waking up in the middle of the night with the most awful stench imaginable all around them inside their bedroom. Like they can't get away from it. They can't open the window because it's coming from the outside, but it's inside. I mean, one woman talked about Elsie Herring, who just love her so much. She was such a pioneer in the movement to get change. But she talked about her mother lived right next to the spray field. And the very first time Elsie knew about the problem coming home from New York and moving home to take care of her elderly mother was when the spray gun went on, and she actually heard the sound of the droplets falling on her mother's roof like rain. I mean, you're talking about, this is not water. There's water in it, but it's hog waste. I mean, it's the stuff that comes out of the pig's butt. I mean, it's a grotesque reality that could actually be be invading your home. It also gets into the waterways. It gets, I mean, the number of times that hurricanes have blown through. This is Hurricane Alley. I mean, storms have come through, tropical storms that have caused these lagoons to overflow and spill into the rivers and kill a billion fish. I mean, the amount of environmental degradation and human just suffering. I mean, the kind of everyday invisible suffering that these people lived with for a generation. And they tried. I mean, the industry was all powerful. It's a company town. I mean, Eastern North Carolina is owned by the industry in so many ways. Virtually everyone profits from the industry with the exception of the neighbors. And most of these neighbors that were affected by it, again, were poor and Black, didn't have any political power. They tried every which way to organize, tried to get help from the legislature. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted to help until some lawyers came along, and Mona Lisa Wallace, who stars in the story, she is every bit the star that I portray her. She's really a phenomenal human being. Comes from the wrong side of the railroad tracks, grew up a very modest way in a working class family in a very mixed race community in the poor side of Salisbury. And she's always been a fighter for the underdog. And she's done that. She's taken on big industries, the Duke power plant. I mean, like all sorts of corporate Goliaths. And she's the right kind of plaintiff's lawyer. She's really, and I've seen this in her now over 4 years, she does not take cases for the money. I mean, obviously she's running a business. She's been very successful and the money doesn't hurt. But at the same time, like she's always motivated by this is a righteous cause and I'm going to take it. So she took this case not knowing at the beginning if it had any value at all. I mean, as a lawyer, I was able to understand very intimately the kind of decision making that she and her firm, which includes family members, her daughter works with her, her husband is very close to her decisions. Like they had to make a really hard decision. Do we think that this nuisance case, was the claim they brought, has any value at all? Clearly, it's morally right, but do we think any jury is going to give us any money? Going up against a multi-billion-dollar corporate behemoth that's owned now by communist China? Like, do we think there's any chance that we'll ever get, like, we're going to spend millions of dollars, which they're willing to do for the right case, but are we just going to throw money into a boot? Like, I mean, could we win the moral case and lose, the legal case? And they knew that the answer was obviously yes, we could. But I remember, Mona telling me about the decision. She just said, I sat down with my family and with my partner, Bill Graham, and with couple of other lawyers in the firm. And I just said, see the realities here. This is going to be a really tough case. Maybe the hardest thing we've ever done because it's a small firm. They don't have a lot of lawyers. It's going to tax us to the nines. It's going to take multiple years. We don't know how hard it's going to be, but these people, no one else will take their case. No other lawyer in North Carolina will go up against Smithfield. No other lawyer, the largest pork producer in the world, like no one will go up against them if we don't. In fact, there was even a judge, and I tell this story in the book, there was a state court judge at the beginning that said, no one else in the state could handle this case. And I mean, what judge says that about any lawyer? I mean, it
And then
was a
he ends up
surreal thing.
making Mona like just she withdraws, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Because
then
there
he
was a
makes
mess
her,
with some other
and then
lawyers.
he's
Yeah.
not going to allow the other lawyers from Texas to continue the case, and he makes her stay in.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
She had to make a decision at that point. Am I
Yes.
going to go it alone? Yeah. It's a
Brilliant
wild,
part of
wild
the book.
story.
I
Oh,
love
yeah.
this. The book is chock full. By the way, you've done a lot of podcasts talking about the book, and I'll refer people to those podcasts. There's several great ones. My friend Talmadge Boston interviewed you. You can't hear it very
Yeah.
well, though. Unfortunately, I listened to it. I've tried a jury trial with Talmadge. We were co-defendants. Fascinating guy. And friend Lisa Blue shows up in the book. I didn't
Yeah.
know. I'm reading along. I texted her right away. This is crazy. I remembered that she was on it tangentially reading, but I had forgotten about these cases. I mean, at one point,
Yeah.
we get so many emails every day. So I knew generally they were going on, but it is a riveting story. It's fantastic. The details, the courtroom drama, the characters, just like I was going to say the book writes itself, but I know that's not true. It takes somebody talented like you, but it's just such a fascinating read. I love in the New York Times, I don't have the author here, but she said, Corbin Addison hasn't written a polemic about hog factories. He has calmly assembled a legal thriller full of energy and compassion that addresses issues of real importance. And then it says, I wish that Wastelands were a work of dystopian science fiction, which at times it seems like, by the way, not a damning portrait of how we feed ourselves now. And so what I wanted to ask you, Corbin, is you've talked about Jonathan Harr, Civil Action. I read that. It inspired me. It inspired a lot of our listeners. We read about Aaron Brockovich. You have stated your goal in writing is to educate and entertain. You're certainly doing the entertaining. I believe you're doing the education, but Wastelands, wildly entertaining, chock full of educational points. But I'm wondering, like, what's the end game? What is the educational goal you have in mind? Because to be honest, Corbin, this is tough. And I do this every day with my cases. It's tough, right? We want to help people. We want to change the world. But we read this and it's like, is anything changing? Like Aaron Brockovich, okay, that happened. Civil Action, you read that happened. These things happen, but are these just one-off Pyrrhic victories, or we are actually going to move forward as a society? And the reason I'm bringing this up, it seems like the hog business is almost back to normal in North Carolina. Yeah, you settled, and I don't know all the details. I don't know if there's a consent decree, but a lot of this is managing it so that the companies can continue to make money. We feel good about ourselves because there was a jury award. But in the meantime, I mean, as society, it seems to me we're so willing to look the other way, allow these horrific conditions to exist as long as we know about it. Once we know about it, okay, take care of it a little bit, put some money there, maybe make a few changes, but then go back to business and eat our bacon.
Yep.
I'm not just saying this is every industry. This is, this is every industry. So I don't even have a question, Corbin. Others say, share your frustration with this because I know you see it too. And
look, I mean, yes, it's exactly right. And frankly, Mona has said many times, I've been on stages with her since the book came out. It's always fun to talk beside her. And she often says that what she wished she could have done is get some injunctive relief. And there were reasons why they didn't push for that and ultimately just went with damages. But injunctive relief would have complicated the case in a lot of ways. And it wasn't entirely clear what the injunctive relief would have been exactly. They didn't want to harm the actual growers, the hog farmers, who are individual people or in some cases big companies, but they didn't want to hurt them. They really wanted to force the company with all the money to actually do what needed to be done, what everyone knows needed to be done, which is just a civilized waste disposal process, just like we've done with human waste. They know how to do it. They have the technology. They even paid for it. There was an agreement with the North Carolina Attorney General from 2000 that produced the technology. Smithfield funded it. Smithfield said that we will implement it so long as it's economically feasible. But then they stacked the decision makers with people from industry who said, if it's going to cost us 1 cent more than the medieval, cesspools and spray fields, it's not economically feasible. So they were able to torpedo the end game, even though they had developed the technology. At this stage, what needs to happen is political. And this is where my frustration lies. You can expose the truth through litigation. You can expose the truth through a story. My hope is we've got a producer who's really excitedly pursuing turning Wastelands into an 8 to 10 episode limited series. We hope it end up on Apple and HBO somewhere.
Love it.
Eventually, that would be fantastic. Like that would elevate the profile of the story way beyond what the book has done, what the book can do. In the end, what is necessary is either the company that has no incentive whatsoever to change has to change on its own against every financial incentive it has to make money and to minimize expense. And we don't expect that of companies. We can't expect that. I mean, there are occasions where companies do the right thing, but almost always it's because they've gotten some major PR nightmare that has forced them to say, to save our brand, we have to do something different. Okay, well, that could maybe force Smithfield, but I don't think so. I think what ultimately needs to happen is Cory Booker, Senator Cory Booker, former presidential candidate, really awesome guy. I don't know him, but I was in connection with his office. He's got a bill called the Farm Systems Reform Act, which would federalize a number of the legal innovations that Mona and her team were able to develop, in particular, the integrator liability. That is that Smithfield, the big guy, is liable for the waste, even though their contracts say the small guy, the little farmer is actually liable for the waste. No, actually, Smithfield owns the hogs, even if they don't own the buildings. It's their problem, and that integrator liability would be federalized. That bill would actually mandate that the largest farms be closed within a certain period of time, and there would be a federal budget set aside, an appropriation of a number of billions of dollars to buy out farmers, from those largest farms, and so that they could go on and do something else. I don't know how that would be implemented, but we did it with tobacco. I mean, tobacco is not being produced in the US in the same way. It can be done. Like these are solutions that have been deployed. So this bill is brilliant. Unfortunately, in Congress, it's not easy to get a bill like this passed, but I do know that the farm bill this year, which is going to have to pass because farmers always need their subsidies, and that's, Republicans and Democrats, they always agree the farmers need their subsidies. Cory Booker, my understanding is hoping to implement and attach as amendments a number of elements from the Farm Systems Reform Act inside the big farm bill. We'll see. I haven't seen exactly what, but look, that's the solution. My frustration is in America, and this is true about so many issues, we need to do a hard thing here. We don't need to stop making bacon, and we don't need to put Smithfield and other companies like it out of business. We just need to say there's a problem. This company created a problem for humans and the environment. The cost of the problem, they have been successful in externalizing and forcing society to pay for instead of internalizing it and forcing either consumers or their shareholders to pay for it. We need to find a way legally to force them to internalize that cost and be open about the cost and then solve the problem. Because companies, once they internalize a cost, find a way to minimize it. So they can solve the problem with technology. There are all kinds of solutions that they could deploy if they were actually forced to put it on the books. But the only way to force them to put it on the books is for us as a society to act through our representatives. So there's both hope and also frustration in that answer.
Corbin, we're out of time, man. I could talk to you all day. I need one of those Apple deals so I could have a 12-part miniseries to talk to Corbin, because there's so much more to mine here. Let me just say three things in closing. Number one, call your congressman, call whatever, Facebook, Instagram, about the Farm Systems Reform Act. This is a fair, I don't know all the details in it, but from what I briefly looked at, this is a very fair regulation, and I'm all for companies making profit. It's just if you're going to do so, you can't do it at the expense of harming people and the environment, and there's just a better way. Number two is, I think hopefully this manufactured meat that they're working on, I know it's not going to get rid of all this, but hopefully it'll reduce it someday, that you'll get something that's similar, that, people will still want to eat bacon, but maybe the sub bacon will be really good. And then if you can reduce the number of livestock, then you'll reduce the waste and all the nitrates getting in the ground and all that. Number three, and finally, Corbin, you're a beautiful human being. You have a beautiful mind and a beautiful heart. And although we might not share all the same beliefs as far as religion goes, we certainly share the same passions of loving our fellow neighbor and making the world a better place. What some of the things that, as I was researching you, you said you needed the characters in Wasteland to trust you. I just thought, man, you're such a unique author. I don't think most authors go into it like you do. You mentioned that on one podcast that you held their stories like crown jewels. And I believe that. I believe you're uniquely gifted to see these stories and then be able to write them. But I think that's because you have such an incredible keen mind coupled with this awesome heart that really cares about humanity. So I'm going to encourage you to continue to look for these stories and write. I know you're going to do it. It's so beautiful to watch these stories unfold. And I'll look forward to whether it's on Apple or HBO or whatever, to watching Wastelands. Because, dude, there's just incredible characters in that story, all your stories. And if we can get somebody in Hollywood to that thinks and sees the world like you do, and it can come to life on screen, that'll be awesome for all of us.
Absolutely. Hey, you know what? I've never spent 3 hours on a podcast before, and this has really been enjoyable. I mean, my wife listens to Dax Shepard, and she's like, sometimes he'll have like this really sort of far-ranging conversation, and she'll be listening to it, for 2-3 hours. I'm like, who does that? But actually, now that I've done it, I've really enjoyed it. I mean, you asked the right questions, and you wanted more than, just, hey, tell me about the book and why people should read it.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm excited to have you back on next time. We'll talk more about life and the opioid crisis, which I think you're researching right now, right? For your next book.
Right. That's right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to that.
Thank you. Absolutely. I look forward to it too.
Have a beautiful weekend.
You too.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Beyond Fantasyland, Conversations on Sex, Politics, and Religion, with your host, Kent Craybill.